been a wake-up call for the entire world. And we are asking still that question, how could this happen in the 21st century? And why is the international security architecture helpless in responding to the aggression? And how can this architecture be replaced or perhaps repaired or replaced? It's a wake-up call for New Zealand as we here are getting over the complacency of being a nation far away from international conflicts and geopolitical confrontations. We too are starting to worry about another autocratic regime similar to Russia's, showing assertiveness in our immediate strategic environment. The new New Zealand government has made an important statement about China's role in Ukraine, which I would like just to read out for you. In the joint statement on Australia and New Zealand ministerial consultations, which took place on the 1st of February 2024, the ministers of New Zealand and Australia condemned in strongest terms Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, the ministers called on all those with influence on Russia, particularly China, to exert this their influence to convince Russia to end this illegal war. I think this is a very direct public statement by New Zealand government, basically criticizing China for supporting Russia in this aggression by not influencing Russia to end the war. So the webinar takes place in a context shaped by the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as the recent publication of a scholarly book produced by the Center of Defense and Security Studies of Massey University on national security. The webinar will focus on select topics of the publication, which are also of relevance for Ukraine's national security and foreign policy. While the security environments of Ukraine and New Zealand are understandably and dramatically different, the expert contributions from both countries are expected to identify common interests and collaborative approaches, both academic and practical. So we're also hoping that the webinar presentation will be considered for publication in the academic journals of the organizations involved in this webinar. So we will start with opening remarks by my colleague, Ambassador Khandogi, who is the president of Ukraine's Foreign Policy Association, followed by welcome address by Ambassador Elena Hudson, New Zealand ambassador to Ukraine, and then welcome address by Ambassador Vasyl Miroshnichenko, Ukraine's ambassador to New Zealand. Subsequent to that, we will start the three panels that will be moderated by Associate Professor Will Howard, Director of the Center for Defense and Security Studies, Massey University, and Professor Alexander Sharov, Ukraine's Institute of Economics and Forecasting. So once again, welcome to everyone. I think we have a very significant number of participants right now, close to what we expected. And I would like now to invite Ambassador Khandogi to offer his opening remarks. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Azizian. And I would like to, first of all, say a good evening and good morning to every one of you. And of course, I would like to thank Ambassador Azizian, Professor Azizian, I don't know which is more better for this initiative and for the opportunity for us to meet together. You have mentioned that this is a unique webinar. I would also say that not only it is a unique webinar, it is the first ever webinar of this scale between Ukraine and New Zealand on the issues that are pertinent to the national security. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm sure that this opportunity will be fully utilized by Ukrainian and New Zealand participants to sort of lay out their views on the situation which is unfolding in Ukraine and also in other regions, including the region in in New Zealand of New Zealand. So it is, I would say, a very timely initiative. Not only it is very important, and the timing is very important because today, tomorrow, these days, we will mark the, so to say, second anniversary or 2 years after the full-fledged invasion of Russia to Ukraine. But also we have to put this event in the context of the more distant future. And in February, these days, we will also mark 10 years of the revolution of dignity, which led afterwards to the events that unfolded in Ukraine in 2010, namely the illegal occupation of Crimea and the beginning of the war in Donbass. And that is exactly in February that the main events happened when the regime of Yanukovych at that time crashed the peaceful demonstration of Ukrainians against his personal decision not to sign the agreement on associations with the European Union. So exactly these days, and I would say it again, it is very timely to mark and to put the events that we are sort of now mention in the wider context, the situation which is in Ukraine that started back in 2010. I agree that the security environment in Ukraine and in New Zealand are very much different. We are far apart, of course, and even the time zones are very far apart. And but of course, there are parallels, and we have to be aware of that. And I must say that you mentioned that we based our discussions mainly, and not only, but mainly on the scientific book that was published, "State of Threat: The Challenges to New Zealand Security." But we put it from the Ukrainian perspective as well. So I was sort of impressed to see in this book the authors mentioned three characteristics that substantiate the notion that the security focus has moved in New Zealand from benign to threatening since 2018. And I thought to myself that, and those three characteristics that have been mentioned are first, this is a Christchurch terror attack in 2019, COVID-19 and global recession that followed, and number three, return of great power confrontation. So, although we are far apart, as I have mentioned, it's almost strikingly these three characteristics are similar to Ukraine, with one exception, and that is instead of a terror attack in Christchurch, we have war launched by Russia against Ukraine. To a certain extent, you might also think that this is a terror attack, but also of a larger scale, of course. So we will hear a presentation, and we think that I think, I hope that the presentation we are about to hear from distinguished experts will concentrate on selected topics relevant for both the Ukraine and New Zealand. And thus, I would like to share the conclusion that is in the book, and I share with you, and I share it myself, that these diverse views which will be expressed, I hope there will be differences, of course, in the views that will be expressed during this webinar, increase problem-solving capacity. It's a very nice formulation, the problem-solving capacity of our two countries. we all understand the role of the civil society, the think tanks, the expert community to which we, I think, belong, that try sometimes in vain, but also trying to influence the uh, decision-making process in respective country. So I'm sure that today's webinar, today's presentations and participations, given the fact that we have so many distinguished experts, will definitely be of help both to Ukraine and New Zealand from the point of view of making necessary political decisions. I'm very happy that today representatives of the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine are participating, or at least they have mentioned that they will be here, and also the presence of two ambassadors, which makes this webinar very important. Thank you very much for your uh, initiative, and thank you for giving me this floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And again, unfortunately, in a webinar context, we can't show you our very enthusiastic appreciation by applauding you. But thank you for your very insightful and very encouraging words about what makes us similar and what unites us in terms of our international security priorities. Now, I will invite Professor Alexander Sharov to introduce our two distinguished ambassadors, please. Alexander.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruben. Thank you for your warm words for Ukraine. And I just would like, firstly, to add something to the speech of Ambassador Khandogi. He mentioned that war with Russian war against Ukraine started not 2 years ago, but in principle 10 years ago when Crimea was occupied. And today is exactly 10 years after it's happened. So our events is not only for 2 years anniversary, full-scale invasion, but for 10 years anniversary of starting this war, unfortunately. Well, but fortunately now I have a pleasure to present Ambassador New Zealand to Ukraine, Miss Alana Rose Hudson, who will connect us from Warsaw, Poland. I have to say that she has a big experience in diplomacy and especially in economic diplomacy, what is especially important for me because it is a subject of my professional interest. And I hope the embassy will pay attention for both issues, for security issues and for future post-war economic cooperation between our two countries. So by now, Your Excellence, floor is yours.
Yakuyo, thank you. And kia ora from a very rainy Warsaw. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It's going to be a rich conversation, and I'm conscious of my time limit, but I'm going to offer a few reflections here from Warsaw from a New Zealand perspective. So when I arrived here in Warsaw in August 2021, we were still very much in a COVID world. That's what was preoccupying us. I still remember I was in Kyiv in January 2022 and trying to navigate how to get a PCR test to be able to re-enter Poland. That all changed, of course, on 24 February, and I recall a senior Ukrainian representative observing to me that actually Ukraine became COVID-free on 24 February. So I mention that now because it puts things in perspective, I think, for us. So while I wasn't personally on the ground in Kyiv during those early weeks of the full-scale invasion, I definitely witnessed the impacts firsthand here in Poland. There were, as I'm sure you saw in the media for those that are based in New Zealand, women and children wandering the streets of Warsaw, only carrying shopping bags, but being grateful for having got across the border. And as in other countries, Poles were opening their homes to arrivals from Ukraine. And I recall even our office cleaner was saying that she planned to drive down to the border on the weekend simply to offer transport to anyone who needed it. I've visited Kiev 3 times during my posting, but my trip in November 2022 is going to stay with me forever. It was a calm day. We were lucky in that sense, but the signs of war were everywhere. And coming from New Zealand, that can be quite confronting. For all of you in Ukraine who are living with it on a daily basis, kia kaha. You'll know what that means by the end of this webinar, I'm sure. But also, the resilience of the Ukrainian people was obvious and continues to be obvious today. So cafes remaining open, and even in communities like Irpin that was so badly affected, families were moving back into repaired housing and trying to get on with life. So New Zealand was quick to provide our support to Ukraine. And just thinking back, because it is also a 10-year anniversary this week, we were supportive of Ukraine following that initial invasion of Crimea and have continued to be right throughout that period. But in terms of the full-scale invasion, we were quick to provide support. We had a team down at the border. And I think I do have to pay credit to the support of average New Zealanders as well, who were looking for ways to help. And that extended to a shipping container full of hand-knitted teddy bears. But in addition, the New Zealand government rolled out a range of measures, including humanitarian support for the legal accountability work stream, which is so important, military support, including an ongoing large training mission supporting Ukrainian soldiers, funding for weapons and ammunition, as well as for demining training and nuclear security. And we introduced a bespoke sanctions regime targeting Russia, which is something that we had never done before. That all happened extremely quickly. Today, almost 2 years on from Russia's full-scale invasion, our support for Ukraine remains just as firm. And as Ruben quoted in his opening remarks, ministers have just very recently formally noted that they continue to condemn in the strongest terms Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. The newish coalition government has reiterated its support for a comprehensive, just and durable peace in Ukraine in accordance with the UN Charter, and reaffirmed New Zealand's ongoing commitment to supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And those principles frame everything we are doing as a team here in Warsaw. This war, as you're going to be discussing today, has global impacts. And that is, I think, why we have such a varied group of experts from both sides of the globe joining us. Now, as a diplomat, looking for ways to support peace is an important part of our work. And for that, we have to commend Ukraine for the peace formula, President Zelensky's peace formula, which we have endorsed as the fundamental starting point for a lasting, just peace. For us, we absolutely agree that it's for Ukraine as the victim of unprovoked aggression to determine the terms on which peace will be made. I've been personally engaged in this process, including attending the last National Security Advisor level meeting in Davos. Someone's off mute. A functioning international rules-based system is critical, and as such, we can welcome Ukraine's determination through this peace formula work on ensuring that present challenges created by Russia's full-scale aggression are not able to repeat. The principles of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity are critical. While diplomacy alone will not end this war, it remains a critical part of the process. We also really appreciate the holistic way in which Ukraine has shaped the process, including consideration for both people and the environment. And that, I think anyone who's from New Zealand or who has worked with New Zealanders really speaks to the concept of whakapapa, of the connection between people and the land in which they come from. So I think there are different cultural contexts, but things that bind us in that sense as well. So I'm sure that is my 5 minutes up. I do want to wish you all well for your discussions today, either your evenings or mornings, depending on where you are. So, yakuyu and kia kaha.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Hudson, for your warm words about Ukraine and for your hard work to support Ukraine in these tragic days for our country, for our people. Thank you once more. Dziękuję bardzo. Ngamihinui. Well, and now it's time for welcome address by Ambassador Ukraine to New Zealand, Mr. Vasil Miroshnichenko, who spoke to us from Canberra, Australia. I have to say that Ambassador Miroshnichenko was born in Ternopil city on the west of Ukraine, where I stay right now. So it's additional pleasure for me to say him hello from his small motherland and give possibility to speak on behalf of our big motherland, Ненька Україна. Шановний Василь Володимирович, прошу вас до слова.
I'm very happy to be here with you, and I would like to congratulate Professor Azizan and Professor Handogi on convening this webinar. And it's really fantastic that you can do it. We have here a team of practitioners and also academics, and I think that's a unique skill set of people who've been actually in the profession and now are there doing research, also doing teaching. And I think it's important to have this combination of experiences, which will definitely have a very productive and engaging discussions throughout the evening. And thanks a lot to New Zealand for accommodating the Ukrainian participants, because this 11-hour time difference is quite prohibitive in order to be able to get everybody out there. In my experience, I've had good interaction with the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs, who hosted me for an event in Auckland in 2022 in August. And more recently, when I was in Wellington in December, the Your branch in Wellington convened a round table where I was able to speak. Also, to take in this opportunity, I would like to acknowledge some people here who are on this webinar. Firstly, Professor Boris Homenyuk, who is my professor from the university. Also, Professor Mykola Kulinic, who was an ambassador, who was my predecessor here in Canberra. So good to see you here. And also my friend Natalia Rilic, who is my classmate and currently is a lecturer at the Institute of International Relations. And many other people are here is some of the names who I know from New Zealand, who I met previously. So greetings to you. Well, it's 2 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's difficult to imagine that. And definitely from the very beginning, it was all about two things. First thing, it was the readiness of Ukraine to fight. And secondly, it was the readiness of other international partners to support us. And during this past year, two years, we have demonstrated that we can hold the territory, we can inflict enormous damage to the aggressor, and we can even neutralize Black Sea Fleet. And if duly equipped, we are capable of defeating Russian troops on the ground. In this respect, I would like to thank New Zealand for standing strong with Ukraine. Overall, over $80 million New Zealand dollars been allocated for help. Some of that went to military assistance. Some of that was directed towards humanitarian, economic needs. Also, the sanctions which were imposed on Russia. And it's important to mention that previously New Zealand did not have any sanctions legislation. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, a special Russia Sanctions Act was actually taken through the parliament, was approved. And since then, New Zealand, I think, offered at least 8 or so different rounds of sanctions, or maybe more, that have been imposed. And this is, of course, Ambassador Elena Helson can correct me if I'm wrong. Also, there were some very special highlights in our bilateral relations, and one of those highlights was the address of President Zelensky to the Parliament of New Zealand, and that happened in December of 2022. And both of us, actually, Ambassador Hudson and myself, were there in the chamber. And that was a very special occasion because previously there was no actually tradition for any foreign leaders to address the Parliament of New Zealand, previously, and Zelensky was actually the second president to ever do it. So therefore, it makes it a very special occasion, what has happened. There's been some regular contacts at the highest level. More recently, President Zelensky already spoken to the new Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, that was in December, and we really welcomed the involvement of New Zealand into the peace formula and into the implementation and helping us to work on this peace formula, which actually is the only realistic and in our opinion, plan which is currently on the table, which involves 10 important points, which definitely includes, apart from ending the hostilities, it includes food security, energy security, nuclear safety, restoration of the respect towards the UN Charter, as well as accountability and justice, most of all. As we see currently, it's important to believe in Ukraine. It's important to stay united. We see definitely the impact of this war at the entire world, including here in the Indo-Pacific where we are. Currently, the major discourse in New Zealand, as well as in Australia in this respect, is the cost of living. And we see how actually the Russian invasion of Ukraine has really exacerbated these issues. And if there will be, if this war drags on, and that will be due to the lack of leadership on behalf of our allies, I think this pressure on the cost of living in New Zealand will continue, for instance. So there will be higher prices for fuel, for food, for fertilizer, but also it will generally have an impact on the stability and security of the Asia Pacific. And definitely we are seeing here as smaller Pacific islands how vulnerable they are, because if we can allow one country to change borders by force, it really is creating a very dangerous precedent. Now, I think I will conclude here, and I know that you will be having long discussions here. And again, congratulations on convening that. I hope that there will be more interaction, more engagement between New Zealand and Ukraine. And I'm very happy that it's taken place. So I wish you a productive discussion, and kia kaha, and God bless.
Thank you, Ambassador Мірошниченко. Дякую за підтримку і бажаю успіхів в вашій важкій роботі в ці непрості для всіх нас часи. Thank you once more. Now I give back floor to New Zealand and kindly request Professor Will Howard, Director of the Center for Defense and Security Studies, Massey University, to moderate our webinar. Please do it.
Thank you, Alex. Very nice to see everyone here tonight, Your Excellencies and representatives from Ukraine and New Zealand. I'm going to moderate panels 1 and 2. I just kind of note a couple of things and then we'll get stuck straight into it. We're running about 15 minutes over, so I think what you'll see me do is try and keep the speakers to time. But just be aware that our program is out by about 15 minutes at the moment, and so there'll be a focus on keeping it to time. The second thing just to kind of be aware of is that if you want to ask a question to the panelists, please put it in chat, and I will in English, and I will choose a couple to give to each speaker. So without further ado, let's get into panel 1. Panel 1 is on geopolitical shifts. So we're thinking big, we're thinking global, we're thinking around issues of self-determination, territorial integrity, and the rules-based international system, which Professor Azizian noted up front is under incredible pressure, and we've got to consider new options in that space. So our first speaker in the panel is Professor Ruben Azizian from the Centre for Defence and Security Studies and the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs. He'll be talking about New Zealand's perspective. Secondly, we have Ambassador Vladimir Kandoji, who's president of the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Association and former acting Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's going to give us a Ukrainian perspective. And then thirdly, we're going to have Ambassador Igor Litvin, who's the co-chair of the Ukrainian-Chinese Business Council and former ambassador to China and Indonesia, to consider the US-China confrontation and a Ukrainian view on that. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to my good friend and colleague, Professor Ruben Azizian.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you, and I will try not to disappoint you and keep to the time. I would like to make several points on the topic of rules-based international order, and particularly the dynamic between self-determination and territorial integrity. Arguably, this is one of the significant aspects, if not the core, of the entire Ukraine situation, but also prevalent elsewhere in the world. I wrote a chapter for William Howard's edited book on this subject, and it was about a year ago. And some of what I said in that chapter is probably still valid, but things moving so fast. When I contributed that chapter, we didn't have Israel-Gaza situation. As we know, and unfortunately, given media's very particular kind of focus, Gaza developments have somewhat sidelined in the media the war in Ukraine. But that also reminds us all that what happens in Ukraine is not unique. The scale is huge. The scale is unprecedented but the type of the problems that we are experiencing in terms of protecting sovereignty, protecting self-determination, territorial integrity, is not limited to the war in Ukraine. And that is what my chapter was about, and this is what I would like to comment on. New Zealand is a consistent supporter of the rules-based international order. It's a relatively small nation, although this is debated. We call ourselves a small nation, but our neighbors in the Pacific strongly disagree. But it's a small nation. We very much depend on multilateralism and the normative impact of multilateralism and multilateral organizations. Without the norms and rules that are adopted through multilateral institutions, smaller nations like New Zealand will be in great at a great level of insecurity. So New Zealand has, as was mentioned by the Ambassador Hudson, has unequivocally condemned Russia, has been criticizing China for its policies that are in violation of the rules-based international order, although New Zealand's criticism of China is not as strong as that of Russia for a couple of reasons. One is that China is not an aggressor yet, and hopefully will not be. And secondly, China is our #1 trade partner. And of course, there are concerns in New Zealand about not disrupting the bilateral relations with China. We also, New Zealand being a robust country, advocating fairness, has been also critical of some of our strong security allies, such as the United States. When the United States departs from certain norms and rules-based activities. New Zealand foreign policy is basically and mostly bipartisan, but there is a certain tension between our left and right politically in terms of the emphasis. While the Labour parties traditionally support multilateral institutions, the current coalition government, which has a majority of National Party, very much emphasizes bilateral security alliances. And we are seeing in the new policies of the government certain shifting to more emphasis on bilateral security relations with Australia and the United States. There's talk about New Zealand joining the AUKUS grouping at the second tier. There is a talk about the enduring nature of NZIIA between New Zealand and Australia. So that is an important aspect. Secondly, New Zealand is a staunch supporter of both territorial integrity and self-determination. And ideally, both principles should complement each other, but in reality, they often clash with each other. And the dynamic between the two can be quite tricky, both geopolitically and domestically. So, for example, the principle of co-governance with the indigenous Maori in New Zealand has met opposition from a number of political groups in New Zealand who are concerned about this leading to Maori separatism. So at the same time, the Labour Party, which very much initiated this, believes that this is co-governance is about cooperation and making joint decisions. So we have that tension in New Zealand about self-determination of Indigenous people. My next point is about New Zealand responsibility and activity in the Pacific region, where we have had to respond to certain self-determination versus territorial integrity conflicts, namely Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, where New Zealand was an important mediator in that conflict. New Zealand has openly criticized human rights violations in Xinjiang, has been less vocal, but also not very approving of policies of Indonesia in Papua. And on Gaza, the foreign policy maneuvering between territorial integrity, terrorism, freedom of navigation, and self-determination has been extremely challenging for New Zealand and domestically controversial. So Ukraine struggle is a good example how territorial integrity and self-determination can be closely aligned. Ukraine's sovereignty and survival depend on territorial integrity, but also on completion of its self-determination and freedom from Russian imperial ambitions. This is what advocates for territorial compromise don't appreciate. I want to emphasize that. So Ukraine is not, in my opinion, fighting for territorial integrity. It is also fighting for its own freedom. The territorial integrity and self-determination dynamic in Ukraine has resonated strongly, globally, and controversially. Some see in Ukraine's struggle a reassertion of territorial integrity. That is the best part of China's peace proposal, item number 1, which is support for territorial integrity. The rest of Chinese plan are pretty ambiguous and not very helpful in my opinion. Others see Ukraine's struggle as a part of its decolonization and anti-imperialism. There are some ironic cases, actually, which I mentioned also in my publication, that in some political organizations, namely the West Papua Liberation Front, 2 leaders speak very differently on what is happening in Ukraine. One speaks in favor of Ukraine's self-determination, and the other co-leader of the party talks about self-determination of the Russians in Ukraine. So this has created this impact that is often very confusing for some. The impact on the post-Soviet space has been particularly noticeable. Moldova is a case very similar to Ukraine's. So is Georgia's, although more complicated in my opinion, because here the separatists aren't imperial Russians, but minority groups that have also experienced certain unfortunate impact of Georgian nationalism. Kazakhstan could be the next if Russia prevails in Ukraine. Azerbaijan's victory and regaining territorial integrity by Azerbaijan has come at a significant cost of dislocation of 100,000 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. But it has also energized Armenia's own self-determination away from excessive reliance on unreliable and autocratic Russia. The big dilemma for many of us is Russian autocracy and imperialism, which is combined in Putin and Putinism. There is unfortunately Putinism without Putin, but it would be much less effective without Putin. Democratic opposition is completely suppressed. We are all very demoralized, I think, and depressed after the basically passing away or murder of Alexei Navalny. Will Russian Federation survive? No signs of a breakup yet. Russia is not USSR, we know that. The Russians are a majority in most of the ethnic republics of the Russian Federation. But there could be some rise of ethnic tension, in my opinion, when the benefits of war will start to pale in comparison with the losses that some ethnic regions of Russia are experiencing during the war. Another significant trigger could be the second round of post-Soviet self-determination away from Russian control under the pressure of local nationalism, which could in turn ignite ethnic nationalism in the Russian Federation. To sum up, hopefully Ukraine's legitimate struggle to assert its sovereignty and regain territorial integrity will not have a one-dimensional international effect through prioritization of territorial integrity, but also would recognize the importance of legitimate self-determination and anti-imperialist struggle. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Azizian. It's both heartening and slightly demoralizing to hear that you would like to revise the chapter in the book. But it's really valuable for us to hear your experience thinking around this space, particularly as things evolve in terms of what's happened in Israel and what's happening in Hungary at the moment as well. So thank you for Professor Azizian. Just a reminder to everyone, you can put questions in the chat, which we'll ask at the end of the panel. So if you have any questions for Professor Azizian, please put them in and I'll pick one out for him. But without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Ambassador Vladimir Kandoji, who's going to give us the Ukrainian perspective on self-determination, territorial integrity, and the rules-based international system. Ambassador.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in the discussion. As I already mentioned, the topic of the discussion is very acute and very interesting and very important. I think that the topic or the themes that we are discussing are, and particularly the one that is now being discussed, and self-determination or territorial integrity, mixed messages, like it is reflected in the article by Ruben Azizian, is core to understanding many of today's conflicts. I think both, not only international, but both internal and international conflicts. So to understand better the interrelation between these two concepts of self-determination in the territorial and territorial integrity, we will find answers, at least we'll try to find answer to many of the conflicts. And I totally agree that by the time of publication, we didn't have the situation in Gaza, which we have now, which would have probably influenced the notion and the description of what it is. With all due respect to this publication, and in particular to very thought-provoking article or the thesis by Professor Azizian, I would venture to say that, in my opinion, I would rather talk not self-determination or territorial integrity, but self-determination and territorial integrity. And the mixed messages that certainly are there would give us a better understanding of the nature of these two very important political, legal notions. So in the case of Ukraine in particular, this is exactly what was happening. The territorial integrity and self-determination, those two basic principles were violated. Both of them were violated in the case of Ukraine. So if you go back to the, let's say, to February 2022, unprovoked aggression of Russia against Ukraine brought to the spotlight these two important principles. By the way, these are principles, not by the way, but simply we all know that these principles are enshrined in the UN Charter. So if you go back a bit to the 1991, the proclamation of independence in 1991 was a realization of the principle of self-determination for Ukraine, which was denied this self-determination for many centuries. And that was actually a paradox in history, that a 1,000-year-old nation didn't have its independent state. There were, spots in the history, so very brief periods of time when Ukraine tried to build an independent state, but only in 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we Ukrainians got a chance to realize its basic principle of self-determination. But at that time and further on, of course, Russia, as it turned out, never accepted this principle. And I would give you a little example here. In 1993, for instance, I've been then posted to New York to the Ukrainian mission to the UN. And as you remember, Russian State Duma, then it was the Council, adopted a decision that proclaimed Sevastopol the Russian city. And that was, I would remind you, repeat once again, in 1993, just 2 years after the proclamation of independence of Ukraine. Certainly, the Security Council was convened, and the decision, well, we were not able to adopt a resolution, but the statement by the Security Council clearly stated that the decision by Russian Duma was a violation of international law and was proclaimed as null and void. So from the very beginning, and it's very important to remember, from the very beginning, they did not accept the independence of Ukraine, and later on, it was clearly understood by everybody. So, and in 2014, they launched an aggression, and that aggression was not only denied Ukrainian people of its inalienable right to self-determination, but in that particular case, in 2014, Russia violated the other principle, which goes hand in hand with the self-determination, and that is the territorial violation of the territorial integrity, and of course violation of the inviolability of internationally recognized borders. So that's what happened in 2014. So of course, I can agree with Professor Azizyan, and not only agree, I support this, that these two notions are not straightforward, let's say. So, as in the book, which I read with very much of interest, it is stated that there are certain degree of ambiguity between these two principles, and not only ambiguity in itself, but the misunderstanding rather of those two principles by many politicians and experts. And this ambiguity has sent and is sending mixed messages across the globe, and this is very important to understand. And the example that Professor Azizyan has put forward about the different anticipation and different reading of these two principles of self-determination by representatives of the same political party or the same political entity is very illustrative in this respect. And what is important to emphasize here, that sometimes the notion of self-determination is being used by certain politicians to justify let's say, aggressive intentions or even aggression. Of course, in Asia and Pacific, there are different examples where ethnic self-determination, political confrontation, and geopolitical rivalry are closely connected, and this is the fact, as I myself mentioned, that they are connected. But I will not go into details here. But in the case of Ukraine, and I would like to emphasize it, the situation is very clear. It's a crystal clear case. This is an example. I mean, Ukraine is an example of the neo-imperialistic policy on the part of Russia. And recent pronouncements of Putin in particular and others clearly demonstrate an attempt not only to deny the right of Ukrainian people to self-determination, but to deny the existence, the mere existence of our nation. So I again don't want to sort of go into details and to argue with the sometimes non-scientific, even brutal assertions, like, for instance, the last lecture, so-called lecture by Putin during his interview to very now has become very famous correspondent Tucker Carlson, where he tried to explain from his perspective the history of Ukraine, but which certainly has nothing to do with the real situation. So those pronouncements, let me put it very shortly, in a short terms, they are based on brutal twists of history and false assertion, and this is the way they are, and that reading of history laid the ground for the aggression with the aim of restoring Russia's dominance in Ukraine. So once again, to emphasize that the aim of Russia, it's not only, and in effect, it's not only the violation of those two principles, but also aim is to destroy independence of Ukraine. Having said that, I would like to say a few words about the contemporary way of thinking in Ukraine, how to deal with this situation. Of course, I put aside the efforts of Ukrainian armed forces at the battlefields to fight Russia with the different degree of success, of course, to be honest with, for different reasons. But also I would like to draw attention to the so-called legal front, where we have to do something in order to sort of fight back the violation of those two principles, namely self-determination and territorial integrity. And having said that, I would like to also mention briefly this misunderstanding or misinterpretation of those two principles led to the false assertion, that in Donbass, those so-called representatives, or as they put it, as Russia put it, people of the Donbass so-called republics are fighting for their self-determination, which is very far from the truth. And not only they're fighting for their self-determination, as part of this, they are suffering quote unquote genocide on the part of Ukraine. And this has led Ukraine, and of course the justification for that is that Russia is trying to protect these so-called peoples of Donbass. This has led Ukraine to sort of file a complaint in the International Court of Justice just a few days after the beginning of the aggression, because this notion of protecting people that are fighting for self-determination was one of the justification of the Russian aggression. So the complaint was filed where Ukraine sort of referred to the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, saying that since Ukraine never do any genocide action in these territories, the aggression of Russia against Ukraine is not and was not justified. so since we have not committed this, the basis for the aggression should be proclaimed by the International Court of Justice as does not correspond to the reality. So we ask the court to recognize that Russia's aggression was based on unfounded accusations, as simple as that. And was that was the abuse actually of violation, not only the abuse but also a violation of the convention. You know, it's very difficult to deal with Russia outside of the framework of in the International Court of Justice, outside of the framework of the convention. So this convention was chosen just to be a battleground, with a legal battleground with Russia on this issue. So no legal ground for the invasion. That was the main objective of Ukraine's the complaint that was filed with the International Court of Justice. In the long run, of course, we hope that we will obtain a decision that military invasion in 2022 was illegal, and Russia should be held responsible and accountable for this aggression. So aggression has not been, the aggression, although there are too many discussions are going on around this term, but and resolution of the General Assembly, the decisions of other international bodies clearly stated that it was the aggression and illegal occupation and so on, but it has not been legally recognized as an aggression. And we think we proceed from the assumption that we need a qualification from the International Court of Justice. So on the 2nd of February, not so long ago, there was a preliminary ruling of the International Court of Justice, and but unfortunately, of course, as always happens, it was not 100% to what we expected. So court decided not to examine the complaint regarding whether or not false accusations, as they are, led to the aggression. So because as they put it, the aggression, so-called aggression, notion of the aggression is beyond the scope of the convention. But, and this is very important, court will consider this matter. Court decided to take up this matter because the first part of their ruling is about the jurisdiction. So they decided to take up this matter and to continue consideration of alleged genocide committed by Ukraine and against Russian-speaking population in Donbass. And the ruling is evident. There was no genocide on Donbass, and there are ample facts, very many facts that testifies to that. And so that will give Ukraine legal ground to counter Russian propaganda and continue legal battle for the recognition of the aggression as unprovoked and illegal. So in conclusion, I would like to say that the chapter we are dealing with of this book now contains very important evaluation and analysis of the pillars of the current security structures, and that is territorial integrity and self-determination. And the views expressed in this publication merits thorough consideration, I am sure about that, and not only from the regional, but also from the global perspective. From the Ukrainian perspective, balance between two concepts, which Professor Azizan advocates, and rightly so, is not exactly pertinent to the situation in our country now. In my opinion, Ukraine does not have an outstanding problem of self-determination now with regard to the whole country or with regard to any minority that is living in Ukraine today. But the problem out of these two that we have is the violation of the principle of territorial integrity and inviolability of Ukrainian borders within internationally recognized boundaries. So, and Russia is using these other principle of self-determination as a pretext and a cover-up for its aggressive action in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. By focusing on language, the smallest thing, the difference between and or, you talk to us about the importance of language and note that ambiguity creates mixed messages around who is considered legitimate and by whom. Thank you. That was very, very valuable and insightful. If you have questions for the Ambassador, please put them in the chat and I'll ask them at the end. And just in the interest of moving along, I'd like to introduce our last speaker in the panel before we move to question time. Ambassador Igor Litvin, co-chair of the Ukrainian-Chinese Business Council and former ambassador to China and Indonesia. He's going to speak about the US-China confrontation from a Ukrainian viewpoint. Thank you, Ambassador.
Yes, greetings to all participants of this webinar. I hope you hear me because I've got some technical problems as I don't hear the discussion. But anyway, if you confirm, then I will start. From 2018 to 2023, US-China relations were in a linear downward spiral. Different reasons are cited at different times. Say, President Xi Jinping's autocracy, Chinese diplomats behaving like world warriors, alleged genocide in Xinjiang, introduction of the national security law in Hong Kong, threats against Taiwan, excessive territorial claims in the South China Sea, spying, unfair treatment of foreign companies in China, theft of intellectual property, unfair trading practices, the baleful influence of Confucius Institute, hiding information about the origin of COVID, the list goes on. The most recent is surely China's refusal to condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine and its persistence in being friendly to Russia. All those have collectively fed a sense of considering China-US contradictions.
Yes.
I should say that from 2018 to 2023, US-China relations were in a linear downward spiral. Different reasons are cited in different times. President Xi Jinping's autocracy, Chinese diplomats behaving like world warriors, alleged genocide in Xinjiang, introduction of the national security law in Hong Kong, threats against Taiwan, excessive terrorist claims in the South China Sea, spying, unfair treatment of foreign companies in China, theft of intellectual property, unfair trading practices, the baleful influence of Confucius Institute, hiding information about the origin of COVID, the list goes on. The most recent is surely China's refusal to condemn Russia for its bloody invasion of Ukraine and its persistence in being friendly to Russia. All those have collectively fed a sense of fatalism that the countries were heading towards the abyss of outright economic disconnection and disastrous military conflict. While each grievance is worthy of discussion and debate, we should also know that China has its own grievances against the Western of the US. Chinese leaders and many Chinese citizens believe that underlying Western negativism towards China is an unwillingness to accept China as an equal and desire to pull China down if possible. Let us just recall such events like Treaty of Nanjing, 1842. Treaty that ended the First Opium War, the first of the unequal treaties between China and foreign imperialist powers. China paid the British reparation, ceded the territory of Hong Kong, etc. Let us recall also the aggression of the Eight-Nation Alliance. It was Germany, Japan, Russia, Britain, France, the US, Italy, and Austria-Hungary that invaded China in 1900 to put down the Boxer Rebellion. Let us take also into account the phenomenon of the homogeneous nature of China. China is an unusually homogeneous country. More than 92% of its population is Han. There is no comparable nationality in the world now or in the past, which in huge numbers share a common culture and civilization. The Han people have only one literature, and acknowledge this same hero. China's homogeneity did not happen by chance, but rather is the result of particular policy decisions. Han rulers for millennia have found it difficult to govern non-Han people because they behave differently. It is for this reason that China instinct is always to build walls around itself, not to keep its people in, but to keep foreigners out. The Chinese national anthem talks about rebuilding great walls. China built walls, not just physical walls, walls for capital flows, cultural imports, foreign moves, educational material, cyberspace, and as we saw recently, bacteria and viruses. And here, with regard to the current security situation in Europe caused by the unprovoked, treacherous, bloody Russian war against Ukraine, we may put this question. Will China sacrifice relations with the United States for timely strategic union with Kremlin? The answer is firm no. And this is the same answer coming from both sides, US and China. Analysis based on quotes from President Xi Jinping himself of clumsy Russian propaganda, which assures us that China has only one path to be friendly with only Russia, creating alliance with it against the United States and from the big two. Such fabrications not only create false ideas about China's practical goals, but also form inflated expectations of society and politicians regarding Russian-Chinese relations. They simplify the entire foreign policy of China to a black and white palette. Let's take a look on Xi Jinping's statements on US-China relations. Once open, the doors of China-US relations cannot be closed again. China-US relations have a bright future. The United States is unique in its history, culture, and geographical location, which have shaped its particular development path and social system. We fully respect all of this. Another, China never bets against the United States and never interferes in its internal affairs. China has no intention of challenging or displacing the US. We will be glad to see a self-confident, open, constantly growing and prosperous United States. China does not seek to divide spheres of influence and will not wage a cold war or hot war with anyone. China is committed to dialogue and opposes confrontation and builds partnership instead of alliances. We are ready, it's a final that I'm going to present. We are ready to work with all countries to promote global modernization based on peaceful development, mutually beneficial cooperation, and shared prosperity. Let me emphasize once again that these quotes belong to Xi Jinping, and therefore are a guide to countries' entire foreign policy. Look at declared Xi Jinping's 5 pillars of Sino-American relations. Number 1, jointly form the correct perception of each other. So number 2, effectively deal with disagreements together. Number 3, promote mutually beneficial cooperation. Number 4, mutually take responsibility as great powers. Promote cultural exchange. Of course, we can say that there are just beautiful phrases that are pleasing to Americans. But in this case, the same can be said about all Xi's words addressed to Russia. As Russian propaganda declares, it must be admitted that the US-China relations are contradictory, ambiguous, and their future is unclear. But. Attitudes in China have become friendlier to the US last year, according to a new survey from the Morning Consult. One factor could be the slowdown in China's economy. Why it matters? After several years of spiraling bilateral relations and deepening distrust, the shift in views could help support a thought that both US and Chinese leaders work to improve dialogue and stabilize relations. I mean, first of all, the November 2023 meeting between US President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping on the APEC summit in San Francisco, their first meeting since the G20 summit in Indonesia last year. By 2022, more than 80% of Chinese respondents said that they viewed the US as an enemy, according to the poll. But in October 2023, that number had fallen to less than 50%. Meanwhile, China's economy has slowed to its lowest level of growth, indicates amid real estate and debt crisis. Sky-high youth unemployment, it's about 20%, and declining foreign investments. More than 75% of Chinese respondents said they were concerned about US-China tensions, and more than 75% also said both sides should work to resolve tensions. The summit meeting between President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping held in November near San Francisco, just in advance of the APEC Economic Leaders Week, was the culmination of a year-long process that calmed the waters. The two sides announced a range of deliverables in economic and security issues and tried to convey a sense that they could effectively manage their difference. Although the United States and China are still engaged in a comprehensive contest for power in oversetting the global rules of the game, guarding created, and as a result, the likelihood of the most disastrous outcomes has receded. Moreover, even though the chances of a genuine thaw that resolves fundamental differences and leads to greater cooperation are low, there also are repreciated sources of structural stability that could keep relations from further deteriorating in the coming years. Nevertheless, it will take active diplomacy and some good luck to keep ties from fraying in this year 2024. Beyond specific actions, the two sides adjusted the tone of how they framed the relationship. The Biden administration readout said that two sides are in competition, dropping the previously adjective strategic from characterization of ties. In place of the highly critical language about the United States and the Biden administration that have been dominant in the past few years, Chinese state media coverage was consistently highlighted the friendly and respectful nature of the meeting and had presented a helpful vision for future ties. Chinese ambassador Xie Feng's speech to the US-China Business Council annual gala in mid-December last year is perhaps the best example of his major shift in tone. Or take US Secretary of Treasury Helen remarks on US-China economic relations made on the same time at the same place. Like, I cite, America's fundamental economic strengths means that we have nothing to fear from healthy economic competition with China or any other country. Our strengths positions us to seek new opportunities while navigating challenges. It's within the context that we've shaped our economic approach to China. Another, I and other US officials have repeatedly stated that the United States does not seek to do cuckoo with China. This would be damaging to both our economies and would have negative global after effects. There are three objectives for our relationships, he said. The United States will pursue a healthy economic relationship with China, one that benefits both sides. We will seek to cooperate with China in global challenges. And because our national security must remain our foremost priority, we will deploy our economic tools when needed to secure our country's national security interests and protect human rights. And last but not least, when the US-China Business Council was established in 1973, China's share of global GDP was less than 3%. Now it's almost 18%. China has become the United States' third largest trading partner after Canada and Mexico. The United States is China's largest. China's conference with the United States was valued of 664 billion last year. In 2022, it was 755 billions. So now it's 11.6% from 2022. In January, as you probably know, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had, like it was reported by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, candid, substantive, and fruitful strategic communications with the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, aimed at furthering our pledge of dialogue with their leaders, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. And at the very end of today's subject, it is better for the U.S. to shape multipolarity as it is crystallizing and be primus inter pares. That is completely achievable. China cannot be first among equals because of the nature of its culture. Neither Europe nor India. The US has a culture suited for multipolarity, although we can't openly admit. To some extent, the culture that binds the European Union together and the culture that binds ASEAN countries together are both American-derived. It is therefore in Europe's interest to help bring about to a multipolar world with the US as the first among equals. China and Russia won't like it, but no, there is no alternative. American sanctions against China's technology sector are a happy blow to the Chinese economy. The rift between China and the US can no longer be repaired. Gradually, the confrontation between the two countries is moving into the winner and loser stage. For now, China cannot directly respond to America's aggressive sanctions because it will harm itself. But there's very interesting opinion that this is a battle of David and Goliath, and China is supposed to be a David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And you speak to an issue that New Zealand and its military partner Australia are thinking about very much so with the AUKUS alliance and the recent today's announcement by Australia that it's overhauling its surface fleet, growing it, and putting on a missile and defence capacity and undersea warfare capacity. So a very pertinent question for and conversation for your New Zealand audience today as well. So thank you, Ambassador. We have time now for questions. I've got one in the chat. If anyone else would like to put one in, now's the time, and we'll pose them to our panel members. So with that, I'm just going to read this one here, and I'll give it to one particular person. So, Ambassador Igor Litvin, this is a question for you. What would the impacts of a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan be on the ability of the US and its allies to respond to the Russian invasion of Ukraine? And you can see it there in chat. Maybe Professor Azizian, I might pass that one on to you because I know that you will be able to answer that one as well. It's something you've been thinking about.
Ambassador Litvin probably can't hear us, right?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nishan, for that question. Not an easy one, but I don't expect anything less from you. I can be a little bit cynical here and say that we are already questioning the consistency of the US support of Ukraine. China's invasion of Taiwan will probably have a significant impact on the United States' ability to continue supporting Ukraine. But I think the question today is less about the impact of China invading Taiwan, which in my opinion is still unlikely, but more on how do we influence America's domestic politics, which seems to be much more obstructive to supporting Ukraine than potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
Thank you, Professor Azizian. I'm looking for some more questions in chat. Now's your time to have some interaction with three incredible experts.
Yeah, except unfortunately, Ambassador Litwin can't hear us, right?
Yeah.
So, but if I may just go back to Ambassador Handogi's statement, that I have to say that, as I mentioned, I have done some rethinking after my own chapter last year. And as a result of that rethinking, and particularly in the light of President Putin's very vulgar, brutal kind of denial of Ukraine's, national identity, I have actually clearly tried to state that in case of Ukraine, territorial integrity and self-determination, meaning struggle for independence, are basically completely aligned. Because initially, many of us thought that what Russia wanted was just a grab piece of Ukraine under the pretext of supporting self-determination of the Russians in Ukraine, as you said. I use that as a cover. But then the more we analyze Russian rhetoric from Moscow, the more we see that it is not just about taking part of Ukraine, it's actually to deny Ukraine's own existence and survival. And that's what I tried to say also in my presentation, that those who are arguing for a territorial compromise don't really understand that it is much bigger than territorial compromise. It is about a survival of an independent Ukraine. And so, but unfortunately, as you said, the battle has mixed levels of success. And we just hope that Ukraine will have all the strength, inner and external, to withstand that. So that's maybe my after presentation comment.
So we haven't got any more questions in the chat, but I think what we'll do is we'll just pass over to Ambassador Khandogi to respond to Professor Azizian, and also, I guess, to reflect on his call for what we can do about problem solving in this space. And Ambassador, if you could just respond to Ruben, add any thoughts around problem solving, and then we will move on to panel 2 after you have answered those questions and shared your thoughts with us. Thank you, Professor Azizian, and welcome again, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruben, for your clarification. Rather, it's not only a clarification, it's a state of the fact. And I understand that time has passed, and the idea of the principle of self-determination and territorial integrity, these are evolving concepts, of course. And not only they are evolving, but the fact of the matter is it's a matter of how you read it. And unfortunately, these two concepts are being used now and again for the selfish interests of certain countries. I don't want to name the situations, but we all know that sometimes to justify something, you employ a concept. And in case of Russia, of course, they're employing unsuccessfully, I would say, I would think. I think no one except Mr. Putin is questioning the identity of Ukrainian people and the identity of the Ukrainian state. And this interview that I referred to clearly showed to many of us this. So I think it's what I would like to emphasize is that we have to work on these two issues, and what we are doing, as I have mentioned, in the ICJ, we are trying to pursue this issue, and hopefully we will succeed at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And look, I'd just like to say thank you to Kathleen, Aidan, and Igor for putting some questions in. I think we will move on. So I would just to briefly answer those questions as best I can before moving to panel one. Kathleen, become involved with the NZIIA, I think is the answer to your question. And it's the NZIIA which is doing most of the thinking in that space. And of course the universities as well, but I think NZIIA is a national body and representative of a broad range of thinkers in that space. Igor, I think that if the speakers today had an answer to your question, they would have given it. And Aidan, it's a really provocative question. Thank you, and we'll think on that. And Jonathan, I've missed yours as well, but I think with that, we're going to move across now to panel 2. So just to introduce panel 2. In panel 2, we have 2 speakers. We're looking at digital currencies and contemporary economic statecraft. So we're starting to move the conversation quite differently from the one that we've just had. We have 2 speakers. We have Jose Miguel Alonso Trabanco, who is from the Centre for Defence and Security Studies and is also representing the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs. He's going to give New Zealand's perspective on that. And then we're going to turn to a Ukrainian perspective from Professor Alexander Sharov from the Institute of Economics and Forecasting, and former Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Ukraine. So 2 esteemed thinkers, and we're going to have a very, very interesting conversation around the future of money, what that might mean for fiat currency, and what that means for thinking about conflict and security, economic security in the 21st century. So thank you. Without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Jose Miguel.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Professor, for this introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And sorry, Jose, before you start, please feel free to put questions into the chat as you go. And so when we get to question time, I've got plenty of content to share with the speakers.
Can you see my screen now? Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, the title of this presentation is Digital Currencies, Their Potential Roles in New Zealand's Economic Statecraft. First, we need to clarify what digital currencies are all about. These are purely virtual items created to perform all the roles of money, medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. They were born in a pivotal context shaped by the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis, the rise of global complex interdependence, growing economic digitalization, and controversies surrounding the accumulation of unsustainable debts, the unprecedented power of high finance, the legitimacy of fiat money, and the implementation of unsound monetary policies. As a financial technology, they belong to the ongoing wave of innovation known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Their technological cornerstone is the algorithmic record-keeping system known as blockchain. They represent the latest chapter in the evolutionary history of money. And even though cryptocurrency started as a marginal phenomenon, it has reached a substantial level of international projection, and it has also attracted the involvement of mainstream or conventional market agents. However, not all digital currencies are created equal. Their universe is increasingly plural and complex. So we have stateless and decentralized cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, corporate private virtual currencies like Facebook's Libra project, and we also have central bank digital currencies designed as a new form of state-backed legal tender. So what has New Zealand's experience with digital currencies been like? Well, it has been rather limited, and there's an ambivalence determined by contrasting examples. The most direct source of contact is the flourishing business of cryptocurrency exchanges. These are virtual platforms in which these assets can be bought and sold for profit. And this comes with exposure to volatility and illicit transactions. There are also cases of criminal ransomware cyber attacks involving the demand of payments denominated in cryptocurrencies. And this raises concerns about preparedness for similar acts motivated by political or strategic interests. Right now, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand is studying the prospective creation of a central bank digital currency. Deliberations are still ongoing and no final decision has been made yet. But these deliberations are focused mostly on technical, technological, economic, financial, and regulatory criteria. So the point of this contribution is to widen the spectrum of deliberations because there are risks for New Zealand's national security. In fact, cyber currencies have been identified as enablers of illicit activities, including business operations of organized crime groups and money laundering activities. New Zealand is vulnerable because it represents an attractive consumer market, it has a developed financial system, and it has an open economy. There have been cases related to the criminal theft of cryptocurrency wallets. And as the RAND Corporation warns, virtual currencies can be manipulated, co-opted, exploited, and even launched by terrorists, separatists, and insurgent forces, not in the pursuit of profits, but motivated by political interests. These currencies entail challenges for the Westphalian preservation of monetary sovereignty. Specifically, unofficial and corporate digital currencies are a source of unwanted economic, political, technical, ideological, and symbolical competition for the monopolistic issuance of money held by the state. Monetary policy, please keep this in mind, is an instrument to direct the performance of economies, including the management of trade, taxation, and governmental expenses, as well as, of course, exchange rates. Moreover, crypto assets can weaken the legitimacy and functionality of official currencies, especially if their adoption becomes widespread. They can also facilitate speculative attacks motivated by political or economic purposes, and this would create macroeconomic distortions and disruptions. Right now, the prospect that unofficial virtual currencies will overtake state-backed legal tender is overblown due to their instability, limited projection, and lack of political support by a great power. However, this might change as a result of the development of increasingly ambitious cryptocurrency projects. And then we have the prospective involvement of digital currencies in strategic competition. As I'm sure you're aware, the sphere of money has become a key arena in the chessboard of great power rivalries. The hegemonic role of the US dollar, this exorbitant privilege, as the world's dominant reserve currency is being contested. So states interested in furthering a multipolar balance of power have an incentive to develop alternatives to the international financial and monetary systems connected to the US dollar. And in fact, digital currencies are already playing a meaningful role in this game, as seen in Chinese, Iranian, and to a lesser extent, Russian economic statecraft. And finally, there are unknown risks. After all, we're talking here about a nascent technological innovation that entails a substantial disruptive potential. And as such, it can bring unanticipated risks or unforeseen vulnerabilities. And despite their apparent resilience, the impact of emerging phenomena can threaten their stability or the integrity of their systems. For instance, the rise of quantum computing might compromise their cryptographic protective shields. On the other hand, there are also opportunities to strengthen New Zealand national power. The first is the improvement of financial intelligence. As a team of former CIA executives explain, a better knowledge of blockchain-based operational environments can improve financial intelligence capabilities in order to track suspicious transactions and payments involving state and non-state actors. And this offers actionable data about money flows and hidden connections. Please keep in mind that financial intelligence is not just about surveillance, it's a strategic instrument of economic statecraft and can be used in order to disrupt, if necessary, enemy financial networks. Then there's the strategic diversification of monetary assets, especially the potential role of unofficial cryptocurrencies as potential unconventional reserve assets. They have proved to be resilient from both market disruptions and deliberate attempts to undermine them. and they can be strategically leveraged by states which seek a non-aligned geopolitical orientation. They're also helpful to diminish over-reliance on financial circuits controlled by foreign powers through diversification, and they represent conduits to manage the growing rivalry between the US and China. Then we have cryptocurrency mining as a strategic industry. Cryptocurrency mining is the process in which a collaborative verification of transactions takes place through the performance of increasingly complex mathematical equations, and the network computer that manages to provide an answer to the puzzle is rewarded with new monetary units that are minted. And this process requires as ingredients an intensive electricity supply, state-of-the-art computers, internet access, and cooling systems to mitigate the heat that is generated as a byproduct. It's called mining because it's supposed to mirror the difficult extraction of precious metals. And its benefits include the promotion of technological development, the generation of wealth, and the encouragement of startup entrepreneurship. So in a nutshell, this would be useful to upgrade the profile of the New Zealand economy. After all, the country has all the comparative advantages that would be needed to do so, including renewable and affordable energy, the cold temperatures of the South Island, a qualified pool of manpower, a flexible legislation, a developed financial system, and access to the hardware as a result of its closeness to the Asian economies in which it is manufactured. Then New Zealand can, as a small state, can rely on the weaponization of non-state cryptocurrencies. Unofficial cryptocurrencies can be leveraged as instruments of power projection against hostile states and non-state actors. They can be useful for clandestine purchases, payments to reward intelligence assets, the instigation of macroeconomic disruptions. They are also potentially useful to buy hidden influence to wage psychological warfare through social media platforms, and also to support militant proxies behind enemy lines. So as you can see, they can operate as either force multipliers or asymmetric equalizers in order to hit rivals in a way that would not be possible through more conventional means. So for a state such as New Zealand, the weaponization of non-state cryptocurrencies can give it a chance to punch far above its weight, so to speak. Then we have blockchain and the improvement of military logistics, since it offers inalterable data records, distributed operational protocols, and cryptographic shields. And so it has applications for the field of security, for the better logistical management of military supply chains, the protection of classified information, a higher degree of resilience of communication platforms, and so it represents a catalyst for the improvement of hard power, especially as New Zealand seeks preparedness in order to face an increasingly uncertain strategic environment. And finally, we have the potential of the digital New Zealand dollar as a minor regional reserve currency in the Indo-Pacific. According to SWIFT, the New Zealand dollar is the world's 16th most used currency in international payments, far ahead the currencies of countries whose economies are much larger, including Chile and Mexico. And a central bank digital currency could aspire to become a minor reserve currency, similar to the role held by the Swiss franc in Europe, especially in a scenario of growing geopolitical multipolarity and monetary pluralism. New Zealand has assets in order to make this happen, including Auckland's financial know-how, unimpeded access to international capital markets, a British legal heritage that upholds the rule of law, an important degree of participation in international economic exchanges, and membership in economic multilateral frameworks, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and the Digital Economic Partnership Agreements. And it will be wise to design an accompanying financial infrastructure to seek connections with arteries linked to both Western and Asian currencies, and perhaps to operate as a bridge. So, a digital New Zealand dollar could mean that New Zealand can aspire to become a world-class financial center and also to increase the projection of its soft power. So, our strategic takeaways. For the New Zealand national interest, digital currencies represent a double-edged sword, as you can see. Their larger significance brings risks and advantages, but New Zealand economic statecraft is unprepared, and this is not just a cognitive shortcoming, because this can actually lead to the proliferation of threats and missed opportunities. Therefore, it is pertinent to widen, broaden, and deepen the spectrum of deliberations, because a clearer sense of strategic situational awareness is needed. And the bottom line here, the point I'm trying to make, is that money is way too important to be left in the hands of economists and central bankers alone. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Jose Miguel. And just to remind everybody, if you have questions for Jose Miguel, do put them in the chat now so we can ask them of him at the question time. Jose Miguel talks to us about the national and economic security benefits and risks of cryptocurrencies. And one thing that I'd just like to emphasize to our Ukrainian audience is that New Zealand students within our program study malware and ransomware, in particular the WannaCry and NotPetya attacks, and the use of asking for ransom from Bitcoin, and then whether or not they were used for nefarious and purposes as well. So these are really pertinent questions that we understand our Ukrainian audience and members today are very familiar with. So without further ado, and thank you, Jose Miguel, for your tight presentation. You've allowed us to catch up a little bit. We're going to move now to hear from Professor Alexander Sharov from the Institute of Economics and Forecasting and former Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Ukraine. Professor Sharov, the floor is yours.
There are a few aspects of the security problem with crypto assets. First of all, we still do not know by whom Bitcoin as a main cryptocurrency was invented and why. Who is a stranger called himself Satoshi Nakamoto? Several people were suspected, in particular even one with Ukrainian origins, Vladimir Oksman, who is a software developer of Ukrainian origins from Zhytomyr area near Kiev, who worked at that time for Samsung and later moved to Goldman Sachs. There is, however, another opinion, which is that it is the special services themselves, in particular the American National Security Agency, NSA, in one way or another applied to the creation of Bitcoin. Another threat increased precisely in the conditions of the successful development of the cryptocurrency market. It means their use for laundering dirty money, what Jose Miguel told about. There is also a significant threat related to the possibility of using cryptocurrencies to avoid the currency control restrictions, national control restrictions, first of all, in relation to the movement of capital. In other words, to organize capital flight abroad. Price volatility creates a threat of global financial market destabilization, and at last, not at least, monetary sovereignty, what again Jose Miguel spoke about quite detailedly. This monetary sovereignty is under risk of non-states issuer of international unit of payment by, let me say, non-establishment issuer, without specific identification, responsibility, clear goals, etc. Next slide. If we'll make a look on cryptocurrency security issuers from Ukraine, we should mark first of all that according Chain Analysis 2022 Global Cryptocurrency Index Ukraine was number 3. The index is not to measure, the index is to measure not volume of cryptocurrency transaction, but where the most people are putting the biggest share of their money into cryptocurrency. And Ukraine is one of the more used it. Ukraine's Bitcoin market reached about 2.5% GDP. Among suspicion transaction, 10% in Ukraine, 10% is done in cryptocurrency. And specific Ukrainian problem, not only Ukrainian, but in this issue, I'd like to stress it, it's corruption. Ukraine officials showed in their official tax declaration about 2 billion in cryptocurrencies. It is looked quite suspicious, especially because in 2018, it was only $350 million. So for these few years, especially 4 years, we can see a big rise of their funds of these officials in cryptocurrency. It's quite suspicious. Next slide, please. So it is not surprising that the issue of the development of the cryptocurrency market in the country was considered at the meeting of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, still in 2018, at which it was stated that the further withdrawal of the states from this issue and the legal vacuum in the cryptocurrency market due to the lack of legislative and regulatory framework possesses threat to the economy and state security. And the relevant authorities were tasked with creating a working group to develop regulatory proposals to manage this issue. In 10 years, the state's budget, for last 10 years, the state's budget has lost at least 3 billion Ukrainian hryvnia. It's more than $100 million in taxes from the activities of crypto exchanges whose activities was not yet being regulated in Ukraine. Next slide, please. So in February 2022, just few days before Russian aggression, Ukraine's parliament adopted law on virtual assets, which regulated crypto asset circulation in Ukrainian's economy. But it could be in effect only after amendments for tax legislation. But these amendments not done after this moment because of the war. Next slide. But after the outbreak of Russia full-scale invasion, February 24 of 2022 years, new problems and opportunities in the field of cryptocurrency use have arisen for Ukraine. On the one hand, crypto donations were critically helpful to Ukraine in time when contribution from around the world flows into Ukraine coffers. Just 1 week after invasion, crypto asset donation to Ukraine totaled an estimated 50 or even more than $50 million. I'm just stressed, it was very important in first days before official donation and financial support started. On the other hand, since the beginning of 2022, illegal pro-Russian groups in various countries, many of whose representatives are on sanction list, collected about $5 million for military groups of the occupiers, for terrorist groups. Later, all this information was classified, and I do not give you more fresh figures, but it's looked, they are quite big. Next slide, please. So, to summarize, we believe in crypto future of Ukraine. There is a special Ministry of Digital Development in Ukraine, and the Minister of Digital Development at the Davos World Economic Forum previous year, 2023, promised that Ukraine will be the best place for digital economy. Now, bill for cryptocurrency taxation is in Parliament agenda. This is that amendments for tax regulation which I mentioned earlier. So we expected that full-scale cryptocurrency regulation will start quite soon. National Bank of Ukraine, our central bank, finalized e-Hryvnia project to issue own CBDC, central bank digital currency. Again, this project is delayed because of the war, but in second half of this year, National Bank is going to start second pilot project. During this second project, all commercial banks are invited to participate and involve their customers in using of this pilot electronic hryvnia. And financial system, including crypto exchanges and the neobanks, are developed and promoted by Ukrainian government. So, for further development, we need only victory and peace. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. You've pointed us to the importance of innovation in the cryptocurrency space, and that the nation of Ukraine is leading the way in crypto development and the opportunities in that space. A really important discussion. Questions would be great. Thank you in the chat, please. We've got one from Maria. Maria, I'm going to ask the question to Professor Alex Sharoff. Let me just read it to you, Alex. Can you see any big risks related to the relationship or any relationship between digital currencies and AI, artificial intelligence?
Well, of course, I started from issue about who invented cryptocurrencies and mentioned some intelligence services. As for me personally, I don't think that this is product of some special services or something like that. But of course, because it's that cryptocurrency transactions allow to do it in quite specific circumstances. I mean, do it under control or not under control. I mean, out of control, at least out of control of official agencies or open agencies like central bank or government. Then this is tools for some specific operation, and as I mentioned, it's used, as you can understand, it is used by Ukrainian intelligence services during the war, but as our enemies use it as well. Well, you mentioned unofficial intelligence services. Sorry, I didn't understand what you mean exactly. What means unofficial? Or do you mean that intelligence services do it unofficially?
No, I think it's artificial intelligence in terms of what's coming out of Google and Microsoft at the moment, rather than intelligence in terms of intelligence collection.
Yes, of course, specific of cryptocurrency give much more possibilities in principle for everybody. I think because this transaction is still not very developed, it's in process of invented new possibility. So we even don't know right now all possibilities, and it means all risks which are created by cryptocurrency transactions. This is why not only in Ukraine, official regulators are looking very very specifically, let me say, on this transaction, and they do not hurry with legislation, for example, to do it legal. And even if we look on establishment of CBDC, yeah, all major players do such projects, but nobody of them started this project. We have CBDC only in Bagams or in Laos, if I'm not mistaken. But neither USA, nor European Union, nor even China started it. They just looking to understand all risks.
Thank you, Professor Sharoff. I've received a direct question for Jose Miguel. I'll just read it out to Jose. What is the risk to New Zealand's national security when we accept Chinese payments methods such as Alipay and WeChat Pay? They have their currency settlement located in China, and New Zealand has no authority or jurisdiction to monitor these transactions, and raises concerns about how we can protect our sovereignty and independence against the threat of infiltration and foreign interference when those payment methods go unchecked. What's your suggestion for improvement in terms of working with financial transactions coming out of China, Jose Miguel?
Thanks to Alan for sharing this question. There is a real risk whenever we're talking about money flows. Espionage is always a threat that is present. So, for instance, it is known that the American intelligence community has close connections to SWIFT. So, of course, the same risks exist with China as well. So, there are ongoing projects to develop interoperable digital currency bridges so that they do not interfere with the members' regulatory frameworks. And of course, it would be wise to make sure that in these projects there are no backdoors for hostile activities, including interference or espionage. So this is a very pertinent question. And I think the trick here is if these bridges are built to make sure that there are measures that can guarantee a reasonable level of protection and prevent any potential compromise to the country's the integrity of their financial systems.
Thank you, Jose Miguel. We don't have any more questions. I'm going to ask one to Professor Sharoff, and then we'll finish the panel up. Professor Sharoff, both you and Jose Miguel today have talked about the establishment of centralized state currencies, yet currently the cryptocurrency framework is decentralized. We're looking at Bitcoin or Ethereum, things like that, which are decentralized currencies. And then this emergence of centralized currencies effectively to secure nation states, with the suggestion that current decentralized currencies create insecurity. What do you see the future being of the interaction between decentralized cryptocurrencies and centralized cryptocurrencies?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. But in principle, I don't think that anybody can give you a correct and serious answer on this issue, because first of all, as I mentioned, there are a lot of ununderstandable for us problems which are related with uncentralized crypto assets. In principle, as I mentioned earlier, this is even not cryptocurrency. This is crypto assets from theoretical point of view, which can be used in some transaction as money-like assets. But this is not specifically only for this cryptocurrency. For example, some securities can be used in money-like function as well. So to answer on your question, first of all, for one hand, it will depend from how crypto assets will develop. Will it become a real cryptocurrency or not? This is challenge. This is technical and not only technical, but this is technical challenge. First of all, they have to be able realize, carry out all function. For example, to be means of store. Do you understand? With such prices, volatility of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency, when it can change from $20,000 per Bitcoin to 40,000 per Bitcoin as now, and then again to 30, it's quite difficult to speak about some cryptocurrency official reserves, for example. So it's one challenge. Another hand, there's this problem with centralized cryptocurrencies, with so-called CBDC. Of course, it's if central bank will issue such digital currency, it became a currency. But it creates additional problem. For example, the control for all, even retail transaction. It creates a specific control for money flow, not only banks or corporates, but money flow of each person, each individual. And in this situation, this is the right question about Big Brother watch us. And this is not a function of central bank. This is function of specific services which I was asked before. So what kind of relation between these two kinds of cryptocurrency will win? It depends from how they will develop and what kind of technical solution will be found to solve problems. One hand, problems for crypto assets to become a real currency. Another hand, for official cryptocurrency to be money, not instrument for watching for us. So this is two hands, and as the US president say, where you can find one-hand economy. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sharov. Jose Miguel, would you like to add anything before we finish on that topic?
Yes. Actually, I believe that we live in an age of increasing monetary pluralism, so I believe different kinds of money will coexist. And when we're talking about centralized and decentralized monetary architectures, these centralized architectures can be run by either a national state, as in the case of central bank digital currencies, but it can also be control can be in the hands of corporate companies. So I believe that more than one form of money, several forms of money will coexist in the coming decades. And this will, of course, increase the complexity of the ongoing dynamic to redefine the nature of the international monetary and financial system.
Thank you, Jose Miguel, and thank you, Professor Sharoff, for a fascinating panel. You've pointed us to an exciting future, but also the ambiguity and the risk and the insecurity within that space. And it's something that we will need to take note of as things move forward. I'm about to hand over to Professor Sharoff to host the rest of the evening. Just say to our New Zealand audience, it's getting late. Thank you for sticking with us. Please stick with us for a little bit longer. I just want to make one kind of shout out for Terry Johansson, who's going to speak in this next panel. It's a rare opportunity for a New Zealand audience to hear from a warrior scholar thinking about New Zealand. So I would take advantage of hearing from him if you are thinking about sneaking off and going to bed. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. I'll stick around. I'm here as backup for Professor Sharoff if needed, but it is getting late in New Zealand, and we'll pass over now to Professor Sharoff. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Will Howard. Thanks a lot. I think two previous panels were organized very well, and hope to keep this high level for our last panel. This is a panel on conventional warfare today, lessons from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So our first speaker, as mentioned, is Terry Johansson. Terry Johansson is a lecturer at the Center for Defense and Security Studies, College of Humanities and Social Sciences on Massey University, Manavato campus. Terry has extensive experience in teaching undergraduate and postgraduate courses in military command, military operation, and defense planning. Terry, please, this is time for your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Thank you for the kind introduction and the opportunity to speak this evening. What I want to primarily discuss is how the conventional warfare that we've seen come from the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been shaped by the particular context of the region in which it's happened and the geopolitics that sort of create the relationships between the major actors there. What I'll do is discuss some of the lessons that we've seen come out of this conflict. Then I'll propose how this might impact New Zealand Defence Force planning and consider the importance of the conflict within New Zealand's own strategic environment. But firstly, I'd like to propose the definition that I have for conventional warfare when I'm applying it in this talk. So the common understanding of the term of conventional warfare is violent armed conflict between the military organizations of state actors to achieve political ends. The conflicts, these conventional conflicts use recognized military capabilities such as tanks, artillery pieces, infantry weapon systems, combat aircraft, and naval combat vessels. The aim of conventional warfare is generally to degrade the will and physical or military capability of an adversary, to influence their behavior to be consistent with your own desired objectives. Traditionally, the military instrument of national power was used as a last resort only after diplomatic and economic instruments had failed. In this sense, describing warfare as conventional does so to illustrate that the conflict represents the accepted or traditional way that warfare has been pursued in the past. So the traditional role of state militaries to defer or defeat external military aggression from other state actors. In the contemporary area, it is suggested that this role has been broadened to include the use of force against non-state actors and for the protection of vulnerable civilian populations, as well as non-combat support to humanitarian assistance or disaster relief type of operations. Former soldier turned scholar Emil Simpson proposes there are two distinct applications of armed force that we see within the current era. The first application is used within a military environment, so a conflict area, to establish military conditions for a political solution. So the military acting as an instrument of the state. The second use that he says that we see now is the military force directly seeking a political outcome without moving to these through a series of military objectives to achieve that. So having a political effect whilst applying a non-military type of action. Simpson proposes that the first application aligns with the traditional concept of war, and the political focus of the second application pushes the use of military or armed forces beyond that traditional scope. He does, however, acknowledge that, particularly in the complex sort of global environment we're in, that the difference between these applications of armed force or the use of armed forces is less clearly defined than it has been in the past. So while there's the clear use of conventional military capabilities between state military forces of Russia and Ukraine within this conflict, there's also a deliberate application of military influence outside the military apparatus that's more in line with Russia's sort of hybrid warfare concept. We're starting to see new technologies in the Ukrainian conflict, things like combat drones, hypersonic missiles, thermobaric munitions, sophisticated anti-armor weapons that impact the character of warfare. And we're also seeing the use of social media and mass media to extend influence not only within the area of operations, but into national and international audiences that may or may not be directly impacted by the conflict itself. So in Ukraine's case, the operational theatre not only contains state military combatants, but also private military contractors, volunteer foreign fighters, civilian non-combatants, non-governmental organisations, volunteer aid workers, and this greater congestion within a conflict zone sort of blurs the rights and protection of these different actors that are understood under the traditional laws of armed conflict or the Geneva Conventions, and making it increasingly difficult for practitioners on the ground to actually make clear decisions around what is right and what isn't. For New Zealand, the deaths of two New Zealand citizens during the conflict stemming from Russia's invasion of Ukraine raised the country's interest in the war and what was happening between Russia and Ukraine. For expatriate Ukrainians here in New Zealand who had been advocating for the New Zealand government to apply pressure to Russia for its annexation of Crimea in 2014, the Russian invasion added impotence to their cause that they'd long desired. Incidences where we saw a New Zealand Defence Force member take leave without pay to go and fight and subsequently be killed in combat in Ukraine, and the death of a dual New Zealand British citizen volunteer aid worker during an evacuation or a humanitarian evacuation in Solidar illustrate the complexity and what is foundationally conventional interstate warfare, but not the interstate warfare as we knew it. So from my perspective, the characteristics of the Ukraine conflict is very different from the operations I deployed in Timor-Leste and Afghanistan in my previous career in the New Zealand military. The types of operations we trained for initially were similar to what we're seeing in Ukraine. However, when it came to operational deployments, we were largely sent on peace support operations against violent non-state actors. what the Ukraine conflict has done is surface some of the potential characteristics of future conventional conflict and how some of the assumptions have been challenged around how large-scale, high-intensity combat will be fought. And the three characteristics I'll talk about today are nowhere is safe within battle space from intelligence collection or conventional munition strikes. Long-range precision weapon systems such as missiles, artillery, combat drones are ubiquitous within the conflict zone, and that sustained conventional warfare creates unprecedented industrial demand for resupply. So firstly, the first characteristic is that nowhere is safe from intelligence collection. Unmanned aerial systems, electronic warfare assets, communication networks, radar, navigation systems, human intelligence networks, those sort of things that traditional understanding of military operations expect were then complemented by other things such as the use of social media. And there were stories of the Russian invasion being recorded by Ukrainian citizens as they came in on social media, giving excellent data to the Ukrainian defense planners around where the Russian axes of approach were. The proliferation of UAS and electronic sensors means, and down from not only at the strategic and the operational level, but to the tactical levels of war, means that the ability to achieve surprise is becoming increasingly difficult. The challenge for these unmanned aerial systems is that they largely were introduced a long time ago at the strategic level, and the principles that guide the procedures in the West, from the Western Hemisphere, from Britain and the United States, who were early employers of these technologies, are largely keyed to operating where battle space coordination to prevent collisions between manned aircraft it was highly important. While that remains in the operational area, the level of risk acceptance has increased. So although it's becoming increasingly difficult because we have more objects flying throughout the conflict zone, battle space management risk acceptance is becoming a lot higher. But it's not only the physical sort of deconfliction that needs to occur. Deconfliction between the frequencies of these technologically advanced systems that command and control or collect data or sense and provide information back to commanders to be able to make decisions is becoming more penetrative. But in order to maximize their effect, coordination of the different frequencies in which they operate. So one of the key lessons brought out of this congestion was the need for management of the electromagnetic spectrum and frequencies within it in order to stop you undermining your own activities through clashing frequencies. One of the reactions we've seen to this ubiquity of sensor suites and long-range weapon systems has been a greater dispersal of operations across the ground. Whilst these smaller pockets are dispersing and then concentrating for significant effects, this dispersal also brings challenges onto commanders around how they exercise control over these assets. More assets means greater burden on the weak part of a military system, which is the human's ability to process that. So whilst this commander's attention is being driven from subordinates to higher headquarters to allocated sensor suites, time around decision making is not necessarily shortened, and also we get this symptom where potential paralysis of analysis can happen. So although dispersal is key, there are also challenges in doing it. And you see with the Russian attempt to use their new doctrine where they were trying to have the junior commanders using initiative, because they're not practiced in it, because it's not a generational activity, that they tend to lack the initiative to be able to generate sufficient tempo through quicker action. Looking at demand, the final characteristic is how intense the use of munitions has been in the conventional warfare we've seen. At the peak of, so Zabrodsky in his work with Rusi around the lessons in the early part of the war indicated that the peak of fighting in Donbass, Russia expended the equivalent of Britain's entire ammunition stock in 2 days. And similarly, because of Ukraine having less artillery munitions, it took them no more than a week for Ukraine to use the equivalent amount of rounds that the British war stocks held. The true challenge with this high intensity consumption of ammunition is not just the delivery, as the weapon systems can cope with this sort of demand, but it's the production and replacing that. You link this with an estimated drone use being put at 10,000 units a month being destroyed in the conflict as kamikaze drones, or the suicide drones, where they're simply flying drones packed with munitions into targets. Replacing that number of technologically complex equipments also places a significant burden on a state's industrial complex. And the broader effects of this demand we see in some of those commodities that we use in everyday life, your oils, steel, that sort of thing. As the war machines demand more to be fed, then the prices for the everyday person go up. So what does this mean for New Zealand? What does the conventional warfare mean to the New Zealand Defence Force? And we get a variety of questions that arise out of that are all kind of difficult to answer. Thus far, New Zealand's offered training, and it continues to offer the training mission in the United Kingdom to the Ukrainian troops, intelligence support and logistics support to Ukraine's defensive operations. Should this conflict escalate further, that includes the commitment of NATO combat forces actively participating in Ukraine with NZIIA, even though it's only a special partner of NATO, not an actual member, be asked or be able to provide a more tangible contribution to those multinational operations. Would such a request to a small military like New Zealand's be feasible, and would it have a significant enough impact? Could New Zealand realistically be expected to engage in high-intensity combat operations within a conventional operational theatre like Ukraine? In research that I've done with and speaking to a Polish colleague, he brought up the point, and this is his direct quote, that New Zealand doesn't have a Russia. So it doesn't have an existential threat to its sovereignty. So its context of its strategic environment is very different from Ukraine and the other Baltic states. So would the lessons coming out of this conflict be relevant to New Zealand's defence forces? When we consider the characteristics of the conventional war that New Zealand could be involved in, conventional war in New Zealand's immediate strategic environment is likely to be different from the Ukraine conflict. The conflict is likely to be the United States and China due to tensions over the latter's claims of the South China Sea and expanding its defence involvement into the Indo-Pacific. The dominant physical environment for any conflict like this would be the maritime domain, with increased exploitation of electromagnetic spectrum. Anti-access area denial concepts developed specifically to counter the United States' strength and force projection would likely shape the way that the conflict operates. The type of conflict would mean a limited role for land forces and a greater reliance on naval and air assets, which would potentially cause challenges for the New Zealand's Defence Force as it's not balanced this way. Land forces would be valuable in capturing key terrain that enhances our ability to prevent opponent manoeuvre, but it will not play a significant role. So similar to Ukraine, however, such an engagement would be long-range mobility and enhanced survivability. UAS, dominance of the electromagnetic spectrum, and battlespace coordination would remain important factors. However, again, those will all be in the maritime and the airspace rather than the land domains. So where these types position New Zealand, New Zealand can either take some of the lessons from the Ukrainian conflict to base its future force development. Alternatively, it can use the hypothetical scenario of its most likely course of action to focus more in its direct region. Third sort of option would be to take lessons from both that are applicable and where it can develop its forces in that way. And the final one is to focus directly on its region. Each of these options would have challenges for the New Zealand Defence Force around its international relationships, its ability to interact with partners. So again, difficult questions to ask around effective contributions to international stability within the means in which a small state like New Zealand can present. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tere. This is a very interesting in-depth analysis and view on the war from New Zealand. I'm just, Vic, I'd like to remind to all webinar participants, time for your question and comments will be in the end of this panel. And it's more convenient if you could send these questions in chat for me, so I can combine them and select more important one. But of course, it's up to you. And remind to all speakers, this is already night time in New Zealand, and I request to keep timing more or less to give possibility for all speakers make a presentation. And now we'll have chance to listen Ukrainian view on this problem. Allow me please to give floor to Professor Boris Gumenyuk of Dragomanov University of Kiev. Professor Gumenyuk has a diplomatic experience not only as ambassador of Ukraine, but also as a rector of Academy of Diplomacy. So he knows how to deal with international partners and how to teach future diplomats. Such way we expected two eyes view. Шановний Борис Івановича, прошу вас до слова.
Thanks a lot. Good morning and good evening to everybody. Of course, it's, as I guess, about midnight, and I just want to express my admiration to New Zealand colleagues for their patience and composure, because it's high time to have a rest. But nevertheless, thanks a lot for this invitation and for possibility to make my presentation. Mr. Jerry Johansson made really a very profound and comprehensive analysis and gave a good description of professional description of the military conflict of war unleashed by Russia against my country from military point of view, and it's very interesting and very useful presentation and to apprehend, to study, and to use. In my presentation, I would like to share with my assessment of this war from, I would say, historical, politological point of view. What is this war? What is it? This is my presentation. Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, to my mind, isn't only unprovoked and unjust, but also unprecedented in terms of the content of classical wars waged in the past. What are the peculiarities of this military conflict in Europe, which hoped that after the First and Second World Wars, mostly waged on its territory, it wouldn't face something like this again? I identify three features which are characteristic of this particular war. The first feature: this is not only and not so much a classic attack by an aggressive state on its neighbor, to take away part of its territory, to seize areas with rich natural resources and developed industrial potential, or establish control over the sea coast, etc. The aggressor's goal is primarily, it was stressed many times today, an attempt to wipe the object of aggression off the face of the earth in general. In this case, if we recall the beginning of the so-called special operation started 2 years ago, the official Kremlin was talking about total de-Ukrainization, that is the absolute destruction of Ukraine. I call this policy political cannibalism of the 21st century, a phenomenon when a military powerful state, in this case a nuclear power state, aims to physically destroy, to swallow, as it was in ancient times, representatives of the enemy tribe. However, the Russians, as always, are disingenuous, and in addition to the slogan of protecting, so-called protecting the Holy Rus from the collective West on the battlefield, which turned out to be Ukraine, they carry out classic barbaric looting, violence, murder of civilians in the occupied territories, the policy of genocide. Despite all these slogans about protecting the Russian society, speaking Russian people, peasants inside my country, they bear, the invaders, the aggressor bears in their plans absolutely practical and pragmatic targets. What I am talking about? Let me remind that according to official statistic, Ukraine ranks 4th in the world in terms of the total price value of natural resources, with annual extraction of about $15 billion and potential reserves worth up to $7.7 trillion. Ukraine is one of the richest countries in Europe in terms of rare earth metals. Among them is lithium, the so-called white gold of the 21st century, which is used in nuclear power, nuclear equipment, and lithium batteries. The Shevchenkova deposit, this is the region, this is the name of the city, in Donetsk Oblast alone has 5.7 million tons of lithium, the category C1, and more than 8 million tons lithium category C2. At the end of 2021, on the very eve of a full-scale invasion, Ukraine began auctioning off permits to develop its lithium, copper, and cobalt reserves. In November that year, 2021, the Australian company European Lithium announced that it was in the process of obtaining rights to 2 promising deposits in the Donetsk region. Immediately, Russian troops began to concentrate on the Russian-Ukrainian border like cockroaches, and the invasion was taking on real features. However, despite all these hidden and undisguised, absolutely material, pragmatic motives, they are not the defining feature of this war. This war on the part of the Russian Federation is a war from their point of view of philosophical, moral, legal, and spiritual values. The aggressor state, the Russian Federation, and its domestic and foreign policy are characterized by a number of features. For example, the use of violence and external expansion as universal methods of achieving goals by the ruling elite, and the acceptance of this practice in the minds of the majority of citizens. Consolidation of various phobias in mass consciousness through a powerful propaganda mechanism and appropriate political technologies, constant exploitation of a hostile external environment, syndrome, and threats aimed at legitimizing the regime and obtaining carte blanche from society to pursue aggressive policies and interfere in the foreign state affairs. To conclude the characterization of the essence of the historical development of the Russian Federation and its current reality, it should be emphasized that the Russian Federation is the only country where 2 dramatic scenarios are played out alternately. Either the government commits crimes against its own people, starting from John Terrible, famous Tsar Ivan Grozny, to the era of Stalinism, or society and the government demonstrate a symphony and commit bloody crimes against other peoples and countries. If to take only the history of the second half of the last century, we can recall Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Afghanistan, Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Syria, and now Ukraine. Ukraine, my country, is the opposite example. Our values and guidelines are also well known. They are proclaimed in the direction of state sovereignty. July 1990, the Act of Independence, August 1991, and the Constitution of Ukraine, June 1996. Our values have a deep root system. They have sprouted and intertwined with well-known European standards and norms. And only their strict observance can make the life of any society safe, prosperous, and stable. Our model of government is based on the idea of social contract between the government and the people, and the basic pillar of this structure is the rule of law, respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms of every citizen, regardless of their social status, an efficient, competitive economic model, and a mature civil society that is able to control the government. These radically opposite views on modern life and prospects for future development were and are the main reasons for the outbreak of Russia's full-scale war against my country. The empire, which Ukraine has long been a part of cannot accept its loss. Therefore, the issue is fundamental. Either the empire continues to exist, or we will finally gain independence, and empire will disappear from the political map of the world. Of course, we will win. This is the first feature of this war. The second is that for us, for Ukrainians, this war has two dimensions, external and internal. The external one is the actual combat operations conducted by the armed forces to liberate Ukrainian territory from the invaders. But there is also an internal dimension to this war. It is no less dangerous than an external one, and it is more hidden, more disguised, has various forms of manifestation, and it is as necessary to defeat the enemy in this internal dimension as on the battlefield. What is the internal enemy? There are collaborators, representatives of the fifth column, who slowed down the activities after the failure of the Blitzkrieg, but didn't go anywhere, lurked and posed a serious potential threat. This internal enemy includes all the shortcomings of our present that prevent us from becoming a strong democratic and social state. The incomplete judicial reform, the weakness of civil society, the imbalance of political elites, and elements of corruption in public administration must all be radically eliminated, because without victory over this enemy, the victory on the front will not be complete, reliable, and stable. Overcoming all the remnants of the Soviet administrative and political system and actually switching to political and legal European values in the course of this war makes it unique and special. So for us, for Ukrainians, this war bears the elements of the national liberation movement. Another important, the last one, from my point of view, feature of this war is the information component. In general, Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has shown all the weaknesses and miscalculations made by the Ukrainian authorities in the field of both general and information security in particular. If since the beginning of the restoration of our state in 1991, we have created formal and, of course, essential features of a sovereign state, our own currency, constitution, anthem, coat of arms, and borders. However, in relation to the information space, Ukraine was completely unprotected. It represented a passageway where the media were either purely Russian or pro-Russian or both simultaneously. They were incredibly powerful, informing a large number of Ukrainians to perceive their national narratives about a common fraternal origin with the context that Russia is usually an older brother, common spirituality, mentality about treating Ukrainians and Ukrainian cultural heritage as something peripheral and secondary. The only small consolation is that this war was lost not only by the newborn state of Ukraine. By and large, it was lost by countries of the old world, the mature Europe. The colossal multi-complex Russian propaganda arsenal, starting with satellite television, Russia Today, the traditional activities of Russian so-called Russian cultural centers abroad at Russian embassies, where a lot of money were invested, so-called gas and oil dollars, worked quite effectively, not only on the brain of the average European, but also on the leaders of some political parties, members of national parliaments and the European Parliament. Unable to compete globally through economic, political, and diplomatic means, Moscow has created the Russian world doctrine and started destroying the world order. This is evidenced by discrediting of virtually all international security instruments, ignoring the agreements that were the basis of the post-bipolar world, rejecting the principles of the Helsinki Final Act. A lot of other agreements, I can mention more than 300 international treaties where Russia committed gross violations and conventions, including the United Nations Charter and the Budapest Memorandum. In this way, the current government of the Russian Federation seeks to create a situation of global chaos in which it is to establish a new order on its own terms and conditions. Thus, I can draw a general conclusion that the entire foreign policy strategy of Russian Federation, which is based on false ideologies such as the special mission of the Russian Federation in the modern civilization, a separate path of development, exclusivity, and the only indisputable correctness of the values of Russian orthodoxy has led to step-by-step deviations of the political leaders of the state from the generally accepted norms of international law and standards of behavior on the world stage. Over the last 20 years, Russia has been steadily slipping into the abyss of self-isolation, building visible and invisible borders with international community, which could not but inevitably lead to the crossing of the point of no return, since this strategy, among other things, was filled with a belligerent, aggressive fever for the forceful return of the so-called Russian lands. The center of the confrontation was the state of Ukraine, which in 1991 unequivocally proclaimed its course towards European and Euro-Atlantic integration, a course of democratic, sovereign development. Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has threatened not only the European, but also the global security system. But the complicity of the collective West, including, I have an opportunity to express my thanks to New Zealand government. I'm not a president, as an average Ukrainian to New Zealand and Australian society, academic society, for support of our resistance to Russia's Ukraine. And this support means that Ukraine will certainly win, and the aggressor country, despite its nuclear status, will suffer a crushing defeat, which will give a powerful impetus to the collapse of this archaic political and administrative system that doesn't fit into the realities of the 21st century. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Gumenuk. I'm just to remind that all questions and comments some later, but now it's time for presentation of his opinion by Professor and Ambassador Mykola Kulinich of Grinchenko University of Kiev. He as well is not only Dean of International Relations Faculty, but former ambassador to Australia and some other states of the Asia-Pacific region. And it makes his participation in our discussion extremely important. So, шановний Микола Андрійович, ми вас уважно слухаємо. Прошу.
Thank you, dear professor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to be with you, and I'm really impressed by the number of participants of our webinar. Quite unique one, not because it's the first New Zealand Ukrainian webinar event in the academic and even this expert sphere. I want to say that it is really time and high time to say some words about our analysis and our expectation of the situation around Ukraine just today, because this day the world will mark 2 years since brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine. As Professor Sharov reminded us that actual war against Ukraine waged by the Russian Federation started on February 20. Just today is 10 years, and it was happening in 2014, when the Russian forces, military forces, seizing Crimean Peninsula and occupying some territories in Donbas region, so launched this long Russian war, an active phase of which is 2 years ago, on the 24th of February 2022. It was really what we say, and our colleague from New Zealand mentioned at the very beginning of the panel. It is a real war, and even we can say that it is aggression, unexpected aggression to our country, and it is the thing that caused a long-term consequences in the world order, in the world politics, and it is really changed the world, to be frankly. And these 2 years, we are just now living in some kind of ambiguity, which we need to be very clear to understand where we are and what is going with around Ukraine in the world, and even we have some kind of consequences and impetus to the regional security, and I will mention about that. The Kremlin initial plan for Blitzkrieg was failed after some weeks of military resistance of Ukrainian armed forces, and the Ukraine proven to be able to fight against a larger and more powerful enemy. And the Russian forces has lost the battle for Kiev. They withdrew from Kiev region and Chernihiv region, and then they suffered humiliating defeat in Kharkiv operation and eventually left Kherson. Just now, situation is rather complicated, and we are just now monitoring development, which is quite controversial from the military point of view, but we demonstrate our military resilience, and Ukraine is a good evidence how to confront, how to sufficiently resist military aggression from the neighboring country. We prove not only our ability and capability to resist Russian troops, but we also demonstrate as some kind of economic resilience, and as far as we know we have some, in spite of very difficult, complicated situation with economy today in Ukraine, some good indicators appear that demonstrate that we are still active from the economic point of view. And if I'm not mistaken, in the Munich conference, our president mentioned plus 5% GDP surplus in 2023. So it is much because of assistance of the world community, international aid, and we appreciate our partners in the world, and including New Zealand, which is very active in this. I will mention later. So this kind of resilience, this kind of resistance, prove that Ukraine is something very special case. And one thing that it is demonstrating very evidently, that such kind of struggle against aggression should be supported, and it demonstrates the ability to consolidate support around our war, around our resistance to the war. But still, there are a lot of questions in different ends of the world, in different parts of the world, why the world community should support Ukraine, why New Zealand, which is very far from Ukraine, should support the Ukraine. And it is more and more illustrative situation in the United States, which considered to be a leader of this coalition against Russian aggression, that to demonstrate that they need proper understanding. Why? Because they entered the election campaign, and political ambiguity is still playing some negative role for making new package of military aid to Ukraine. So answering this question, why, we should look to the situation from the geopolitical point of view, the geopolitical consequences of this conflict, and we should treat it and consider this war not only as a military conflict between two neighboring countries. It is not just a military conflict, border, or some kind of other kind of conflict, but it is more broad. It should be more broad understanding from geopolitical, even from the geostrategic point of view, what's mean to world the events on our territories. We should treat Russian aggression as the evident attempt of Russia Federation to imposing disorder to the world political system, geopolitical system, and by all means, by all instruments, by ignoring the principle of international law, not only ignoring, but trying to manipulate with this principle, as it was mentioned in two very good contribution and very nice contribution of Ruben, our colleague Ruben Azizian, my good friend Ambassador Vladimir Khandougi, when this self-determination principle is the object of manipulation in the sphere of propaganda, of Russian propaganda, for masking the real sense of going on, of real spirit, what is going on in this area. The second is Russia Federation, and they by proxy try to make a chaos, to change the balance of economic system in the world, trying to impede economic trade, trying to impose other objective to the world trade and world economy. And finally, they tried to all together to not to ruin, but challenge the world political system and the world security, which is very dangerous. Today, after 2 years of war in Ukraine, Russia pushed forward another revised model, the old version of two-pole bipolarity, the bipolarity system that was exist during the Cold War. They tried to revise it and then to restore all these dogmas and all these things that was very characteristic to the Cold War, and trying to divide and try to dominate as a new polar, and to restoring polar, trying to restore the former Soviet Union. This is the first. Try to weaken Western, so-called global West or Western free democracy countries, and trying to impose new situation in the world security system. And altogether, we understand that today the majority of the world tried to consolidate the front against such kind of attempts and such kind of totalitarian bloc of countries, or totalitarian front of countries, including, first of all, Russia. Then we see that the very ambitious game of China, which is really strategic partner to the Russia Federation, and many other countries, not many, but other countries, but proxy countries, such as North Korea, Iran, trying to use again this opportunity to play their own political game. From the other side, we have more consolidating, more increasing numbers of countries which joined this anti-totalitarian front, which we can just now formally called Free World Bloc, or Free Democracy Bloc, anti-totalitarian bloc, which includes United States, certainly United States, NATO, non-NATO allies of United States, and many other countries. We joined this this part of the world which tried to oppose by all means, by military, economically, and even ideologically, these Russian attempts to change the balance of the world, to change this new post-Cold War order of security and world balance. This situation is quite dangerous, and we understand from our partners from the other part of the world that it caused, initiates so-called Pandora effect. So it can be like a domino principle process, which can cause another political conflicts in the different part of the world, and especially in the Indo-Pacific area, which is very vulnerable to all political instability. And using this opportunity, we watch very cautiously about the attempts and ambitions of China in their vis-a-vis Taiwan, and their quite aggressive rhetorics toward Taiwan, and situation in North China Sea, and another point. And so that can be quite understandable why two major country, major economy from the south part of the Indo-Pacific. I mean, Australia and New Zealand are so active to support Ukraine. In the context of this global confrontation, and we really appreciate. As far as New Zealand, I want to say that New Zealand very actively joined international efforts to support Ukraine, and starting from the very beginning of war, starting from the United Nations resolution condemning such kind of aggression, it's a resolution EC 11-1. They joined, I mean, New Zealand joined 140 countries of the world condemning Russian invasion in Ukraine and demanded withdrawal of Russian troops from our territory. I want to say that,
can you summarize, please?
Yes, and finally, I come back to the end that we appreciating our partners' assistance and aid. I want to emphasize that it's using this opportunity. I want to send our gratitude to the government of New Zealand for the multi-dimensional support of to Ukraine, including military and humanitarian, and using this opportunity to say to our colleagues from New Zealand that we really appreciate your understanding to Ukraine and your political support of world arena. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very interesting view. I think we still come back to you with Q&A. But now, in the beginning of our discussion, I'm already mentioned that I stay in Ternopil city right now, and that Ambassador Miroshnichenko was born in Ternopil. And now I have a pleasure to present one more Ternopil region-born speaker, Professor and Ambassador Markian Malsky of Lviv University. And again, Ambassador Malsky has experience as a diplomat, ambassador of Ukraine to Poland, and as a Dean of International Relations faculty. The faculty has a wide working relations with partners in many countries and keep focus on international security issues. That's all of mine. I hope Ambassador Malsky could say more himself. Шановний Маркіян Зінович, надаю вам слово.
Good. Thanks so much.
Please do it.
So no, I'm so sorry in advance because we have some problems with electricity and internet here at the faculty. But nevertheless, once again, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this wonderful meeting. Also, my huge thanks to all organizers from both sides for giving us a chance to participate in this conference. I am speaking from the Faculty of International Relations, Lviv University, the oldest university in this part of Eastern and Central Europe, and the faculty, which is one with the oldest school of diplomacy in Ukraine, with history more than 100 years of wonderful educational academic traditions. We train here future diplomats in all possible specialties of international relations. And today, thank you so much that you have invited not only me, but also the institutions and the students of the faculty, which are participants of our discussion today. But as far as we are getting close to the end of our time, I will try to be extremely short. First of all, thank you for the topic of our discussion, the lessons of the war. And let me attract your attention just to one, from my point of view, the most important lesson. The lesson that that this war shows that we need absolutely new, fresh international order. Russian-Ukrainian war marks a turning point, a tectonic shift in modern world affairs. Russian invasion of Ukraine is the most significant shock to the global order since the World War II. Today, Ukraine is really on the front lines of renewed great power rivalry that will dominate the international relations in the international community in the decades ahead. The biggest war in Europe since the Second World War adversely affects the global security, prosperity, as well as environment, fundamentally transforms the international system and requires a fresh approach to the construction of a new international order. The fundamental question here is, what should be the essence of the new international order? Let me remind here the words of a famous Polish diplomat and scientist, Professor Rothfeld. He noted the starting point for such an arrangement could be adopting the following common objectives. The first one is the new order cannot be imposed. It should be negotiated, or more importantly and more likely, formed in the process of mutual adaptations of those states which collectively face new regional challenges and risks. The second is the primary purpose and meaning of the desired world order is this, in this period of rapid and dramatic accelerated changes, is not simply to maintain the status quo of states, international institutions, the status quo and stability, but also change management. How to manage the change, how to create the conditions for the effective prevention of a new great war. And the third one, which is very important and very close to our discussion today, is what in this process is our role of academia, of scientists, of experts, and what we can do, we who do not devise the political decisions and political strategy. In this case, I think we can propose certain minimum boundaries, certain boundary conditions, red lines, which could be used in negotiations among the main actors of the regional and global arena. Negotiation on the new international order. Russian unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has set alight one of the bloodiest conflicts in Europe since World War II. The invasion marked a dramatic escalation of the 10-year-old war between countries and a historic turning point of European security. Ukraine became a battleground in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea and began arming and abating separatists in the Donbas region in the country's southeast. Russia's seizure of Crimea was the first time since World War II that a European country, European state, annexed the territory of another. The hostilities marked a clear shift in the global security environment from a unipolar period of United States dominance to a new one, defined by renewed competition between major world powers. Some Western analysts see main reasons of Russia's 2022 invasion as the culmination of the Kremlin's growing resentment toward NATO's post-Cold War expansion into the former Soviet sphere of influence. Other experts have said that perhaps the most important motivating factor for Putin was his fear that Ukraine would continue to develop into a modern Western-style democracy that would inevitably undermine his autocratic regime in Russia and dash his hopes of rebuilding Russia-led sphere of influence, at least in Eastern Europe. It was always Putin's goal to restore Russia to the status of a great power in Northern Eurasia. The end goal was not to recreate the Soviet Union. The end goal was to make Russia great again. In this concept, a healthy and stable Ukraine was the main obstacle and critical counterweight to Russia. Very, very soon, in 4 days, the ongoing war in Ukraine will complete 10 years, but it is still without any sign of coming to an end. The wish of Ukrainian people is quite clear, in that this aggressive Russian war must end justly on the basis of the United Nations Charter and international law, but not somehow. Ukraine has presented its vision of the path to peace and fundamental principles of a new world order, its answer to new global challenges provoked by Russian aggression. President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, presented it to the United Nations General Assembly at the end of G20 summit as a Ukrainian peace formula. This plan is the Ukrainian answer to a whole series of new global challenges provoked by Russian aggression against Ukraine. In this formula, Ukraine introduces a set of solutions, so-called 10 points that need to be implemented in order to get peace and security in the world. Among them, I hope you all know them. Among them, first of all, radiation and nuclear safety because of high risk of radioactive disaster. Ukrainian proposal was to send a special missions of International Atomic Energy Agency to all Ukrainian nuclear plants. Such missions can verify that any hostile activity against Ukrainian nuclear facilities has indeed ceased. The same goes for the crazy threat of nuclear weapons that Russian officials resort. Next challenge, food security. Ukraine is ready to expand the grain export initiative to other partners all over the world. Each country can join the project Grain from Ukraine with a specific contribution and become a co-creator of the victory over hunger and the food crisis. Third, energy security. These days, but especially last winter, we can witness an attempt to turn the winter into a weapon against millions of people. More than 50% of our energy infrastructure were destroyed by strikes of Russian missiles and Iranian drones. The next one, also important items, the release of all prisoners and deportees, implementation of the UN Charter and restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and the world order, withdrawal of Russian troops and armed formations from all the territory, from the whole territory of Ukraine, full Ukrainian control over all sections of state border with Russia must be restored. Restoration of justice, very important point. The world should endorse establishment of the special tribunal regarding the crimes of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the creation of an international mechanism of compensate for all damages caused by this war. Such two resolutions have already been proposed to the General Assembly of UN. 8 challenge ecocide. the need for immediate protection of the environment. The next one, the prevention of escalation. Ukraine is not a member of any serious alliances. It does not have any security assurances either. That is why Ukraine prepared a draft agreement, the Kyiv Security Compact, and has already presented it to partners. And the 10th confirmation of the end of the war, confirmation under the umbrella of United Nations and some big powers, strong countries, including Ukraine and Russia. It's obvious that war unleashed by Putin may turn out to be systemic. Ukraine must receive all the necessary support because it is clear that the fate of Europe is being decided on its territory. That is a global challenge that the West must accept and win. So the war of Ukraine to defend its freedom and independence is also a war for freedom and democracy in Europe, and not only in Europe. This Ukrainian peace formula could become a strong instrument for shaping the new international order as a model of restoring the rule of international law and global justice. It ensures the full force of UN Charter, enables countries and international organizations to become leaders in particular aspects of the joint efforts to restore, in the long run, peace and global security. Peace formula offers a comprehensive response to the security challenges facing humanity and has already become a unique international ecosystem, an integrated structure with all elements closely interconnected. The formula were discussed on different forums and conferences. We are all waiting for Global Peace Forum this year. Also, Ukrainian peace formula has gradually become global. More and more countries of the world and international organizations are joining the process of the implementation of this plan, participating in a number of meetings and discussions on the mechanisms of peace formula implementations. The 10 steps for peace formula is about international society, is about international security, it is about international safety and justice, and is based on key principles of international law. These principles were confirmed again in Lviv just at the beginning of December last year, in Lviv declaration, where Declaration of Fundamental Principles of International Law was adopted by more than 150 international legal experts from across the globe. Just 75 lawyers, international lawyers, came from the United States to Lviv and participated in the hot discussion of these fundamental principles. These principles of international law are fundamental for international legal order, and therefore for a new architecture of the world order. It was a great event because in this Lviv School of Diplomacy, the heart of the school is a school of international law with great professors during this 100 years. And I think that this realization of this peace formula, the concept, the principles of this peace formula have a chance to be implemented in this, in creating this, in shaping this new world order. So thank you so much for your attention. Once again, on the behalf of all faculty, thank you for joining us, for joining my students to participate in the conference, and we are, Your Excellency, absolutely ready to participate in all your projects and programs. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Malsky. Now there is time for answer on some questions. I have a couple questions, but I will try to combine it in one. One question, I think, for all speakers of this panel. You see, there is new instrument of war, new arms instrument, new weapon like drones, for example, which can targeting not necessary military center. There is usage of private army in this war, not only so-called Prigozhin army. We can remind that in Crimea 10 years ago, occupation was started by so-called green men. We know it was a Russian army, but Putin said there is unknown weaponized men who bought their military style clothes in shop and something like that. So with new units and new weapons used in this war, we faced new challenges, new problem and new prospects. What do you think about this? Which problems it create and how we can solve it? Please, first of all, this is floor for Terry Johansson.
Okay, thank you for your question. Firstly, private armies and mercenaries aren't entirely new. We've seen, particularly in Europe, you've seen private armies operating from even back in the Middle Ages. The new technologies, we tend to adapt and to new technologies as they're introduced, and then we need to work out how we change the rules to account for that. Yeah, I agree that they're tricky because increasingly as we work in the information space, as we work in the electromagnetic spectrum, the effects of these systems are not as obvious or visible that we're seeing. You cause collateral damage from placing a missile in the wrong place. You can see that. You do an electronic attack on a critical infrastructure of a power grid or a water supply system, it's less visible and less attributable. So this is this challenge around Russia's hybrid approach to warfare, where they're willing to push further than that. So again, it's international community developing its international institutions about what is acceptable in conventional warfare and what isn't. And then I'm happy for the others to offer their opinions.
Okay, thank you. Some of Ukrainian speakers would like to add something.
Yeah, just a few words. I should answer it from the point of view of the global balance. So these private armies are not only the instrument that Russia Federation used against Ukraine and on our territory, but they try to use it for in the so-called global south. In other part of the world, were very vulnerable to the political conflict. For example, in Africa, and can be used everywhere. So I think that it's new, not very new. Historically, it's not very new, but this war demonstrates that private armies is widespread in the new type of war. So I think that it will be used as an instrument in this controversial confrontation between two polar, the bipolar confrontation for the so-called world South. So I think it's very interesting to unite it, to combine efforts from our colleagues and partners from our big coalition to see and to monitor the development with the private army in not only the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war, but in the more broader context. So I think it's one of the very characteristic features of the future world.
Okay, thank you. Nobody more? Then, if you don't mind, I'm just reply on one comment said to me by Kathleen Lloyd, New Zealand. She wrote, "Some of us have still a direct link to the destruction of European Jewish society. There are direct links, including from Ukraine to New Zealand, mediated by West Europe and the UK, US, Australia. These are historical links that show we have a shared experience of genocide and with what Ukraine is experiencing. I think these direct links need to be highlighted. I second this opinion and would like to add that, by my opinion, unlearned lessons of history lead to new tragedies. This is our first pilot discussion on security problem, as I mentioned before, and we are going to continue with our partners in other parts of the world. And I think that one of these partners should to be Israel, so we can continue this problem which is raised by Kathleen Lloyd. And now it is time, it is late time in New Zealand, and we are forced to go to concluding remarks. Before concluding remarks, I'd like to address representatives of Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I see Mr. Ishchenko or Natalia Oleynik are with us. Could you please to say a few words to us, if you listen me? No. Maybe there is a lunch break in ministry or some emergency problems. Well, anyway, now we go to concluding remarks, and I give floor to
Alex, Natalia is there. Natalia is there.
Natalia, please. Yeah.
Yes, just we would like to express our sincere gratitude to participants and to organizers of this webinar. And despite the fact that Ukraine and New Zealand are located on different continents, this webinar has already shown that we have a lot in common. We have a lot to share, and we appreciate interest in cooperation, which is important for the development of the relations between Ukraine, New Zealand, and a lot of countries. And our joint efforts to help to find common interests and approaches to practical cooperations, which is of great importance to Ukraine, to New Zealand, and also to the world. And I hope that today's event will become a firm basis for further cooperation between countries, as well as a platform for the exchange of views and cooperation of different countries for the benefit of peace, prosperity of Ukraine, New Zealand, and of the whole world. So again, thank you very much for this opportunity, for participants and for organizers.
Thank you very much to you, to your colleagues, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for your support. for your participation, and I hope we will contact later to continue our cooperation. Thank you. And now I give floor for concluding remarks to Ambassador Vladimir Khandogy, President of Ukrainian Foreign Policy Association.
Thank you,
Please.
Professor, for this opportunity. The time is late. I'll try to shorten my concluding statement, but still I would like to mention a few words and a few points. The first point, of course, is the thanks to the organizers, and I would also would like to thank, as a core organizer of this event, my colleagues from Ukrainian side for participation, for those contributions that they have made. I think they were thought-provoking, they were important, and I'm sure that we would see those remarks somehow highlighted in the final, whatever it would be, a document of our webinar. Number two, I cannot but miss this opportunity and say that today, the 20th of February, is a very important day in the history of Ukraine. Some presenters have already mentioned that, but it's a very important day on the calendar of Ukraine, because today we honor the memory of those perished during the Revolution of Dignity 10 years ago. So that was that revolution itself, and the sacrifices that have been there, they vividly showed, and they have become an example of people's fight for self-determination and territorial integrity, and many other principles that are enshrined in the United Nations Charter, and that constitute the basis of the international law and order. And certainly the second point that I would like to mention is, having listened to the presentations and to the thoughts and opinions that have been expressed, I can characterize them a little bit as somehow maybe not very, let me put it this way, not very optimistic. And it reminds me the basic conclusion of the Munich Security Conference that have been completed its work just recently, whereas some of the observers summarized the mood or expression, or rather the positions that have been expressed during the Munich conference as a lose-lose situation. It's a little bit a fatalistic point of view, which I do not exactly share, and I'm a bit surprised that many experts, the expert community, at least those people that have been present in Munich for the security conference, readily accepted this notion, lose-lose situation, as the basis of our life today. But I think this, summary is lacking a creative approach. Although I understand that we are not in a win-win situation, on the other hand, but still there are many creative approaches to the situation which we're facing now, and of course there are ways and means how to resolve this maybe dead-end street, as somebody is thinking about. And here we come to an international law, I think. And this we have to emphasize once again, that international law, the Charter of the United Nations, provides all of us with the solutions. And my although I agree with what Professor Maisky has said, that the world requires a new security system, but we should not forget that the better is the enemy of the good. And certainly, with all due respect to this position, I share the view that current security structures do not live up to the expectations, still we have to be very careful about thinking in terms of let's destroy everything and we build something better in the future. So I would like to appeal to everybody and to ask those who is involved in analyzing the current situation to read the United Nations Charter once again. Let us read it once again from the perspective of today's world, and then we will see certainly that there are so many aspects of this document, as well as there are so many unfulfilled, so to say, provisions of the international law in general, that if implemented would certainly change the world which we are living today. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I wish all the participants all the best in their endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And now I'd like to use this possibility once more, pay gratitude for initiator and organizer, let me say, engine of this event and our bilateral cooperation to Professor Ruben Azizian. Ruben, please, I give back floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is a great privilege for me to open and close this, what I think was a very productive webinar and event. It was, I mean, it's getting to midnight, but we still have more than 30 people attending. We had wonderful discussions. We didn't always agree with each other, which is also a good sign of a robust multidimensional academic debate. So I will just maybe repeat some of the final commentary made by colleagues, but I'll try to sum up by saying that there are so many things different about Ukraine and New Zealand. The time difference is a huge and uncomfortable oftentimes for running events. We are probably the most distant country away from Ukraine, I think 16,000 kilometers or so. Our two countries have different sizes of territory and population. And we have a quite significant difference in our strategic environments. So these differences can become a good research opportunity for some of the students and colleagues who are watching this, because those who like to do comparative analysis and study can easily pick Ukraine and New Zealand and see how different we are and what different strategic challenges we face. At the same time, I am very much in support of some comments made by our foreign ministry representative and Professor Malski, that there are so many things that unite us despite these differences. And there is a lot of complementarity. And I would suggest that our institutions, and I'm not just talking about the Foreign Policy Association of Ukraine, but also the universities, Ukrainian universities represented here, Massey University and other New Zealand universities, we could focus on some joint research and work. And that would relate definitely how to fix the international security architecture. Do we repair it? Do we replace it? Ambassador Handogi made some very good points about that. How to prevent and respond to aggressions and geopolitical bullying. How to enhance value-based security alliances, especially when foreign policies of some of our partners are hijacked by populists. I think this is something that is challenging Ukraine today, but is also a problem for New Zealand, where we are, and that's no secret, our government of different colors and different orientations are very worried about forthcoming elections in the United States and what would that would mean for not our only relations with the United States, but also the impact on international and regional security. How do we change the mindset and policies in the world and in our region that tend to provide support, material or moral, to Russia? How do we convince these countries that what happens in Ukraine can happen here, that Ukraine is not just another conflict, that precedent is extremely dangerous? I have to say that luckily in our immediate neighborhood, most of the Pacific Island nations have fully supported Ukraine and always regularly vote in support of Ukraine and against the Russian aggression. But that's not the same in the wider Indo-Pacific region. And I think New Zealand and Ukraine could probably join hands, and we have ambassadors who have worked in Ukraine, from Ukraine, who worked in this region. How do we work together to make a change in the way they look at the war? And definitely we should look at how we enhance our research and academic interaction and collaboration. So I'm hoping that this webinar will open up new opportunities for us to work together. I would like to offer myself and our colleagues here in New Zealand for any online opportunities to contribute and share with your students and in various universities, and we would very much love to have you address our students. Finally, I'd like to thank all the organizers, especially the technical team that provided the logistics. I think it worked well. We had one or two kind of technical issues, but overall it went very well. So I want to thank Fran, Francesca, Christopher, Ellen, Jose, Maria, and of course, Dr. Sharov, Professor Sharov, and our Ukrainian colleagues who made this webinar, I think, a success. So with that, thank you very much. I would like to wish our Ukrainian friends a safe and peaceful and happy day, and wish good night and sweet dreams to New Zealand participants. Thank you.